where we will discuss what's going to be on the warrant for FY17 at this year's annual town meeting. That annual town meeting is on Monday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. in the Mudge Auditorium. Not surprisingly, we're actually going to have another special town meeting this year related to Minuteman, and that special town meeting is going to occur within the annual town meeting, and it relates to the bonding for the Minuteman building. Procedurally, it's very simple. What to expect is that Mr. Rapetti, the moderator, will simply recess the annual town meeting, call to order the special town meeting. We will discuss the single issue with respect to Minuteman, which is approving bonding for the new building. Once that's over with, the special meeting will close, and we will return to the regularly scheduled annual town meeting. So I wanted to give everyone a heads up about that. To the extent that you are curious about this single warrant for Minuteman regarding the bonding, the warrant committee is having an open hearing at its regularly scheduled Wednesday meeting on April 13th. Let me see. We have a full agenda, so I want to keep this brief. The only request that I have is for presenters. When you need to move on to the next slide, please just indicate to Mr. Clark that you need to move on to the next slide. So just say next slide, please, or something. There were some problems with that the last time we did this, and we just want to keep the coordination as smooth as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to James Stewart, who is going to present a brief overview of the FY17 budget. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm going to give a brief overview, as Doug said, of the fiscal year budget. We put this together with the help of all of the town departments and agencies and the entire warrant committee. It's been a fairly long fall and winter, but we're pleased to present this to you. And could I have the next slide, please? So for this this coming year, and I apologize, that's a typo. It's fiscal year 17. These three are fiscal year 17 versus 16. The total expenditures will be $36,551,893 versus fiscal year 16's $36,572,000. That's a decrease of about $20,000 in total, or 0.1%. The total revenues in the budget, again, this is fiscal year 17, raised, excluding the use of free cash, is $35.582 million versus last year's $34.6 million. It's an increase of $984,000, or 2.8%. And for this current budget, again, fiscal year 17, the use of free cash looks like a use of about $969,000 versus almost $2.4 million last year. That's a decrease of $1.4 million, or 59%. Next slide. Again, this should be fiscal year 17, Article 4. The increases are grouped here, and we've also included the decreases. But in Article 4, the increases for the schools total about $660,000, or 3.2%. And that's composed of about $500,000 for the regional schools operating assessment, which is up about 5%, and about $200,000, or 2%, for the operating for the schools, for Chickering, as well as the special education amounts that's in that budget. Group health insurance, which is insurance and pensions, is up about $204,000, or about 9.8%. And Norfolk County retirement is up about $105,000, or 10.3%. There's a decrease in Dover's regional schools debt assessment of about $40,000. And this total amount here explains about $970,000 Actually, I apologize. Oh yeah, it explains about $970,000 of the overall $1.197 million increase of the Article 4 budget, or about 81% of that amount. Apologize for the misdates here. Next slide, please. Looking at capital items and special articles, the Article 5 and the special articles, the special articles and special article others are down by about almost $1 million compared to what was spent in previous years. And then when you combine these two, this accounts for about $46,000 of the decrease of the about $21,000 total expenditure decrease. So a lot of it is explained on these two slides. Next slide, please. The components of the overall budget, and this is a slide that we update every year, is largely, first, the operating budget, Article 4, is about 90%, and that excludes debt service, which is about 5.8%. And then we have the special articles, which is relatively small at 0.6, capital items, which is about 1.3, and the reserve fund, 0.7, and we have no prior year snow and ice deficit, so that's 0, as well as miscellaneous items, about 1.6. So as you can see, the overall Article 4 is about 90%. Next slide, please. This slide shows the revenue sources and expenditures. It's the same slide that we show every year. And what we're looking at here is projected fiscal year 17. And this has the amounts that I've mentioned and the estimates for certain of these items. New growth, well, the tax levy is put in at $30,193,000, which is up about 4.5%, or $1.3 million. These other items are relatively self-explanatory, and you can see that the use of free cash is down significantly from last year. On the expenditure side of things, we have Article 4 and various other things, including the Article 5 and special articles, as well as the reserve fund. And those things balance out by addressing $969,000 of free cash to balance the budget. Next slide, please. For Article 4, this is a summary of the spending by category. This is the fiscal year, this column is the fiscal year 2017 requested amount, and we compare the fiscal year 17 versus the prior fiscal year, and as the percentage changes, and you can see that general government is up about 2.8%, or about 56,000. Protection of persons and property is about up 1.9%. Health and sanitation about up 3. Highways about 4.7. Other public agencies about 2.9. And on other services, which is a very small amount, is up 24%. The pensions is up about 9.3% for insurance and pensions to 3.84 million or so. And then you see, again, Dover School operating, the regional operating, the regional debt, and Minuteman Vocational is flat, as is Norfolk Aggie, and the school's total is 21.338 million, which is up about 3.2%. Debt and interest is down about 1.7, and the total overall budget is up by 3.5%, or 1.197 million. Next slide, please. This breaks down Article 4 spending by category. These are about the same percentages as last year. Dover Schools their budget has about 28.3%, regionals about 30.3%, insurance and pensions is about 11%, And then protective services is 8.7, and then it goes down from there. Next slide, please. This is a slide which looks at the categories over previous years and their increases, and they're sort of in order here. So you can see where the big increases were: regional schools up about 5%, local schools about 2%, and insurance and pension up about 9.3%. And this has previous year's differences, percentage differences. Next slide, please. On the estimated revenue side, the breakdown is about almost 82.5%, or a little more than 82.5% is from tax levy, 3.9% is from debt that's excluded, local receipts is 5.5%, new growth is about 1%, and the use of free cash is about 2.7%. Next slide, please. And this is another one that looks at these revenues over time, and you can see that the big one is the tax levy, which goes up by, new growth is a big driver in bringing this up against the 2.5% that we all know about. So that says, that's for this slide. Next slide, please. When you compare the revenues to the expenses, that leaves a gap of $969,000, as I illustrated on one of the previous tables. And next slide. And this is a graph that we also show every year, which shows the budget gap, the amount of free cash we use as a percentage of expenses. And you can see that right now the budget is showing that we'd be using about 2.7% of the expenses as the free cash plug number, which is lower than it's been in any time on this slide. And it's generally been between 4% and up as high as almost 9%. Next slide. And that brings, this is a slide which just illustrates a little bit about free cash. These are the certified free cash balances, which are certified by the state on July 1 of each year. And in that coming year, we have voted at town meeting to use a certain amount of free cash at that meeting in May. So part of the free cash as of July 1 is technically already encumbered. So we also think about the uncommitted amount of free cash, which is not really an official number, but it's the free cash balance that's certified minus the amount that we use to plug the budget gap. And that's sort of the uncommitted free cash, and this is a graph of those two things. We don't yet have a free cash balance because it's not yet July 1 or sometime after July 1, 2016 or 17. So those numbers are not in yet. Next slide, please. So we saw the year-by-year increases and decreases in those graphs, and this is a slide where I just put together to look at some trends. And so what have been the trends over the past several years, say the last 6 or 7 years, in terms of amounts and growth rate? What items are big and growing significantly versus small and growing insignificantly over that time period? Because we tend to look at year-to-year budgets, or at least present that. On the warrant committee, we do think a lot about history. We have a lot of history thinking about budgets. But just to present to you, next slide, please. Now this is sort of slightly a work in progress, but what it is it's, on this axis is the percentage of the budget. So this is how much the category is. And these are the categories: expenditures, Article 4, schools, regional, insurance and pensions. And then this axis here is how much they've grown compounded since 2010. So Big items that grow a lot have a very big impact. Small items that grow a lot don't really have a big impact, but it's obviously something that we look at. Then there's some items that don't grow substantially. This axis is, along this axis is growth. So here at 11%, things have grown a lot since 2010. And it ignores the growth within 2011. It just really looks at the two endpoints and looks at the relative growth. And so you can see that some of the things that are growing very substantially, this axis here is at 2.5%. These items are growing at a fairly fast clip that might be 3, 4, 5, 6, 8%, but they're a relatively small part of the budget. But obviously growing faster than the overall budget because the budget hasn't grown as fast. This slide will be probably either more refined or not used in the future, but it's a way to sort of think about what is creating the overall increase in the budget. Next slide. And also considerations for future years. Going forward, there are going to be things happening that we're also have discussed and think about. There's a teacher's contract. Student enrollments at Chickering and the region are changing, and it's a subject of discussion. Employee health insurance is one of the fast items that's growing, one of the items that's growing quickly. And then OPEB is an issue that we've discussed at the town level and at the region, and the town is funded, as we've seen, much better than most other towns, but it's something that we think about, and the region, which is not yet funded. Next slide. And then also capital budgets. So just working from what the capital budget the capital budget committee has passed out, the items that are on their horizon are relatively substantial in future years. Some of these things will fall off or be pushed out, but they do add up to a significant amount of money going forward. And again, these are not official numbers. These are numbers that have been presented, but in my experience, some of them get pushed out or go away, and other things might come on. Next slide. And then also in 2012, we had a study done of the school's physical plant and the requirements. It was a consulting firm that looked at the requirements that they'd expect to be spending in order for the town and the region to keep up the physical plant. And those buildings were starting to get almost 10 years or more older. And it was helpful and instructive, at least for us, to see what the estimated capital expenditures just to keep up those buildings would be. And so for Chickering, and again, this is a 2012 report, it's not been updated, but it's instructive, I think, just to sort of think about what they had listed in terms of going out to 2033, which I think is less certainty, but it's just there's some larger numbers out there that some of us think about. And it totals about $4.8 million. Next slide. For the regional schools, Dover typically has paid 50 to 60% of the total. This year, as you'll see tonight, the region has a capital budget of assessment to Dover about $160,000. Next slide. And again, this is from their on-site insight report, and these numbers obviously are all subject to change, and but it's instructive of as to what else is out there. These numbers in parentheses were numbers from 2013, where the regional school committee gave a presentation of what they expected those numbers to be. But again, there's some big numbers. It works out to about $15.8 million in total. Dover's share would be something less than that, some percentage, depending on student population. Next slide. And that's it. I appreciate your taking the time and to listen, and hopefully it's been instructive.
All right, thank you, James. It was very informative, and I would like to turn it over to Bob Springett, who is the chair of the Capital Budget Committee, and he's going to address Article 5. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. So before I begin, I want to know, Doug, where's my green, pointer? It didn't come in the mail. It wasn't, I don't want it. Oh, thank you. I'm not going to give it back. So, yes, I'm Bob Springett. I'm chairman of the Capital Budget Committee. And like James and Doug, I'd like to take 1 minute anyway to thank all of the employees of the town, the commissioners and other committee members who supplied all the information and were kind enough to come to our meetings and answer all our questions as we put together Article 5. Also, I've been under pain of death. I have to acknowledge the other Capital Budget Committee members and claim that they too worked incredibly hard and long in assessing and vetting all of the articles that were put forward this year. So some of this James covered, but I'll go through it one more time. I mean, there were an awful lot of numbers, and you can get pretty confusing pretty quickly. So to summarize, the Capital Budget Committee received 11 requests from 6 town departments, 4 requests from the Board of Selectmen, and 1 request from the town clerk. We also recommended approval of the regional school, of Dover's allocation of the regional school committee's capital projects. Now, I'm not going to go over those projects at this presentation, but Dana White will probably do so a little bit later in the evening. So, Article 5 for fiscal year 17 came in at $442,775. The regional school, Dover's allocation, which is about 55.8% of the total, at $160,692 for total requests on a comparative basis of $603,467. Last year, Article 5, the number comparable to the 442 was $770,121, and the regional school allocation was $194,931. So year over year, I calculated the difference as capital requests down about 37% fiscal year 17 to fiscal year 16. And that excludes, obviously, the $650,000 that was approved at town meeting for the facilities upgrade at the Carroll Community Center. So it's a very light year for capital items this year. Overall, the $603,000 represents about 1.8% of the operating budget. Looking at Article 5 going forward, you can see that the amounts are reasonably flat, except for fiscal year 20. In fiscal year 20, there's a confluence of vehicle replacement requests projected, and that's why fiscal year 20 at this point looks higher than what we've been seeing in Article 5. Out in fiscal year 21, there's some requests over $100,000, 2 to be exact. One is to replace the ambulance by the fire and ambulance group, and the other is a placeholder from the police chief. He may, at some point in the near future, have to do a total replacement of the radio system. So we've been sticking that out in the out years, but it's out there, and we'll see what happens. So other projected large expenditures, you can see in fiscal year 18 is $1,750,000 for the Carroll Community Center, and that's to replace the boilers and the control systems for the heating systems. In fiscal year 19, $600,000 for townhouse roof repair, and $1 million in fiscal year 18, which is a placeholder from the Dover School Committee. They're currently undertaking an assessment of costs that would be incurred if the town were to approve a request to air condition Chickering School. The other big item is in fiscal year 20, you can see the regional school number jump up to $818,000, and that was because they plan on repairing or replacing the high school roof. So those are the kind of the big items that we see going out over the next 3 or 4 years. Well, as in past years, most of the requests that we see boil down to facilities maintenance and technology and vehicle replacements. So this year is no different. And I'm not going to go through this in great detail. I'm just going to highlight the items in the interest of time and excitement over some of these items. Okay. So Cemetery Commission, a replacement truck. Fire and ambulance, replacement radio equipment. Highway Department, the last of moving to the steel slide-in Sanders. Park and Recreation, replacement of the large tractor mower, and there's an $11,000 item to repave the entranceway to the Chickering school fields. Police, we have a patrol vehicle replacement, and then a radio tower at Grossman needs to also be replaced. Dover School Committee, replacing air conditioning units for the IT servers. An aerial man lift is a new item. It's to reach areas in the Chickering building that are higher than ladders can reach, because you have a couple of places in that school that are two or more stories high. And then technology hardware is in line with the replacement schedule for desktops, laptops, and Chromebooks. I'm going to skip Board of Selectmen for a minute and go to Town Clerk. So the town clerk needs a replacement to the voting machine. The particular machine that we have now there's no parts available, so servicing is impossible. This is in a presidential election year, so this is something that the town clerk feels is quite important. If we go back to, let's go back to the Board of Selectmen, previous slide. So Board of Selectmen, the Protective Agencies building, update the kitchen. It hasn't been updated since it was built in the mid-'70s and has been well used and in need of some new equipment. Painting of the apparatus ceiling, and that's where we keep the various fire trucks and ambulance and things over in the Protective Services building. Library, they want to install a handrail on the ramp outside the library to assist people to get in and out of the library. And then the townhouse, replace the metered mail machine. The item of controversy, at least within the committee, was the $90,000 request to repair or replace a stairway outside at Carroll. So we had a robust discussion. The vote to approve this particular item was 4 in favor, 3 against. It's one of the few times we've had that much of a disagreement among the Capital Budget Committee members. So what we've done is we've included in the Blue Book a full explanation of the minority view. But I'm going to take just a minute and just summarize what the concerns are. So there really are 3. One is that the proposal would eliminate an exit that goes directly from the old cafeteria in the Carroll School out to the outside. The second thing is cost. And the third issue is a little bit complicated, but it's a question of timing. The members feel that the project should be deferred until a study currently commissioned by the selectmen to assess the additional cost of full compliance with the ADA as we continue to renovate, this thing moves, Carroll, and want it to be complete and the cost fully known before going ahead with this particular project. So that's it. Thank you, and I'll entertain any questions.
I have a question. On the Grossman camp, I was always under the impression that was a private piece of land. Is that a fire tower, or what is the tower for? To replace it.
You'll hear it from the chief.
And folks, just a reminder, if you have questions, if you could step up to the microphone and state your name and address, even if everybody knows it.
Cedar Hill Road, Tom Crowley.
Thank you, Tom.
Peter McGowan, Police Chief. We are looking to replace the existing radio antenna that is on top of a tower, existing tower on the Grossman Camp property. The way it's set up now, it's freestanding and it's tied off with ropes. The price there includes if we have to tie it off with metal with concrete pads installed around the towers. I haven't got a definitive answer on that. I have one quote that says yes, one quote that says no. So we have to replace it this year coming up. So I went with the higher quote, and if we can do it for less, we will.
And is it private property?
Grossman is a private property, yes.
Do we have a permit from them? And are we indemnified in any way?
I can't answer that, Mr. Crowley. That's been there for 15 years or so before my time. I would assume so.
Carol, do you know? Could you answer that question? I mean, Jim, can you?
Pope Hoffman, Rocky Brook Road. I'm not in the construction business, but can you explain the library handrail, how long it is? I mean, that $15,000 just seems way out of what I would think it would cost.
When we asked that question at the meeting, we were told that it's a custom design and custom build for that particular application. And that's what the estimate came in at.
How many estimates were there?
That was just the one estimate. We haven't gone out to bid.
Jerry Clark, Valley Road. I'm just curious. You've excluded the $650,000 that was authorized under a separate article this past year. But if instead of looking at this on a segmented basis of some is in this article, some is in that article, if we look at what we're spending or proposing to spend on maintaining Carroll, we're talking about over $2.1 million on a building that we've historically always said we think we want to get rid of. So I guess I'm a little bit concerned that we don't seem to once again have a plan as to the use of that building, because it's like the traditional case of a house. It is a money hole.
Okay. Hey, Bill, can you go back to the summary slide? This is the 5-year projection. Okay. I excluded the $650,000 for the CCC work because what I was trying to do was compare Article 5 and the regional school fiscal year 17 with Article 5 regional school fiscal year 16 to get a sense of increase or decrease year over year. That's where that came from. My understanding, and Jim's here, and he can correct me when I step in the wrong lane, on the renovation of the Carroll Community Center, I think we've spent about $1.5 million. There was about $800,000 that over the years had been approved at town meeting for things like pointing the brickwork, repairing the roof, and other upgrades. And that was about $800,000. Last year, there was the $650,000 approved for the facilities upgrade, 4 bathrooms at Carroll. So that's roughly 1.5. Looking forward, we have the last bit of infrastructure work is the boilers, which clearly need to be replaced, and then the control systems that also need to be replaced in conjunction with the boilers. That brings the total up around, just rough numbers, $3.5 million, which is a significant amount of money. There's no question about that. What I've heard, mostly from people who have bothered to accost me on the street when I do my walk, is that there's a group of people who feel that spending $3.5 to $4 million to renovate a 25,000 square foot building in the center of town is a reasonable thing to do, because the town will have a multi-use facility for a very long time going forward. And that's been the debate. And I think it's reasonable to debate the item, but I also think that there is value in having that facility for multiple town use, and literally at the price of some houses in Dover, private houses in Dover. So that's been the debate last year. That particular line of argument seemed to carry the day. We may have the same debate next year when the boilers and the control systems come up. We'll see. Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Bob. The next article on the agenda is Article 10, and that deals with whether the town should accept Hawthorne Lane and Clover Circle, which are parts of Dover Meadows. I always get those confused. And by accepting it, the town would become responsible for plowing the streets there. It's my understanding that the Board of Selectmen and Highway are actively engaged in this matter and considering it at this time. However, because it is a citizen's petition, I did want to make available the opportunity to ask any questions about accepting Hawthorne Lane and Clover Circle by the town. No questions. Okay. And I believe the Warrant Committee will have a recommendation on that for town meeting, and I believe the Board of Selectmen will as well, but I'm not 100% positive about that. Okay. Moving on. That brings us to Article 12, which is the regional school. And we have Dana White here with us, who's the Vice Chair of the Regional School Committee, and also Michael Lee, who was nice enough to come across the river from Sherburne tonight and join us, and he's the Chair of the Regional School Committee. So,
and he's also my phone a friend if I get stumped with any questions. Thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to talk about the regional school budget. First of all, I think we want to thank all of the citizens of Dover and also of Sherburne for supporting the schools to the extent that you have over the years. I think we all collectively enjoy an incredible period of success in the schools. We're currently ranked #1 in Massachusetts at the high school level and 16th in the country, which is something to be very proud of. And we think we work hard to not only deliver those programs, but to deliver them in a fiscally responsible manner. So I think that's what we feel very pleased with the work that we've done with the Dover Warrant Committee this year and the Sherburne Advisory Committee to what we think to deliver a budget that is responsible to the citizens of Dover. So, first slide. A little bit about how the process worked this year. It's obviously an iterative process. Where we start is never exactly where we end up, and this year was a bit long and arduous, but a very good process overall. After our version 1.0 budget, we actually did something different this year. We moved to a different kind of budgeting process. We're calling it a no turn back philosophy. You can also call it trend line budgeting, but really to look at what do we really need to run the schools and try not to be quite as conservative when we're budgeting. I think we'd gotten into a bit of a a cycle where we were budgeting very conservatively year over year, and that was causing some of our line items to grow. Now, it's important to note, we were never, and to the point where at the end of each fiscal year, we would turn money back to our excess and deficiency, which is our version of free cash, to 2.5% to 3% of our budget. It's important to note, though, that we weren't taxing the citizens of Dover and Sherburne that extra money. We would be pledging that same free cash against the budget to make up for that amount. So our goal this year was to take all of that out of the equation and get us off of the process of very conservative budgeting and then pledging excess and deficiency against it. Where we ended up with that then was a very different budget when we got to the end of our process. Fortunately, we were being led by our interim superintendent, Bill McAuliffe, who is very used to this method of budgeting, which allowed us to progress through the process pretty easily. The central office, the school administrators at the region and at the, both at the high school and the middle school, as well as our special ed department, were instrumental in helping us to get to our version 4. Next slide, please. So our version 4, as I said, got us to a different kind of budgeting. It ended up really driving down our reliance on excess and deficiencies to the end where we ended up with only having to pledge $250,000 of E&D towards the revenues to meet the needs of the budget. Our goal would be by the end of this year, we'd be turning back almost no money back to our free cash and hopefully breaking this cycle of dependence on excess and deficiency. Fiscal 17 will really be a test of this new model. Hopefully we've nailed all of our budget line items right. We'll see how we do, but I think we did a pretty good job of building the budget from the bottom up and feel pretty confident about all of those different line items. We, as a region, took the steps to increase our fees, both the athletic fees and the parking fees, which generated about $24,000 of extra revenue. As you probably know, there are very few ways that we can raise money as a district, and fees are one of them, and we wanted to make sure that we were contributing to the budget increase just as the citizens of Dover and Sherburne are. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see how we did. I think we did pretty well. By the time we got to our version 4.0 budget, the salaries, which is the biggest component of our budget in any given year, were up 3%, and we'll get into a little bit about why that's up 3% with some of the additions that were put in. Our benefits and insurance were down. Even though overall our insurance costs are up, we were able to, in the budget process, budget, we think, more realistically, which actually brought the overall number down. Everything, I don't have to read you line by line, but the bottom line is that our total operating budget in the end is up by 1.3%, and then with the benefit of our refinancing of our bonds that are outstanding, we end up with only a budgetary increase of 0.8%. So if you go to the next slide, if you were paying attention during James's presentation, you notice our assessment is up by 5%, which seems like it doesn't quite match with the 0.8% that the budget is up. So really what that's driven by is a shift in the assessment. Every year we go through an exercise where we look at the number of students in the region that are from Sherburne and from Dover, and that's what drives the percentage of the overall budget that is allocated to each of our towns. So this particular year, we had a shift in enrollment to Dover, which increased our percentage allocation by 1.5%. So while last year our town, Dover, took 53.4% of the budget, this year we're at almost 55% of the budget. So that's really the difference between our overall budget, operating budget going up by 0.8% and the overall assessment going up by 4.2%. We, as I said, worked hand in hand with Dover Warrant. They gave us very strong and good guidance this year. They asked us to deliver a level service budget, and only if we were going to increase anything, to give very specific rationale on why those items were increased. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about those increases on the next couple slides. It's good to know that on Saturday, Sherburne did approve their apportionment of the budget. So right now we're sitting in a good position, and we're looking forward to working with the Warrant Committee to get this over the finish line in Dover as well. So next slide, please. So what went up? What constituted part of that 3% increase? we, again, went to the administrators and said, what do you need to deliver the budget of the school? And it's some specific head counts. And we have an extra 0.4 FTE that brought our high school science teacher up to a full-time, which was important because the interest in sciences right now at the high school is growing, which is great, and class sizes had been increasing beyond what we were comfortable with. So that was really the main headcount addition in the general ed budget. We have a program within our educator evaluation system, which is state mandated, something called qualified peer observers, and that is teachers helping other teachers become better teachers. So that's an item that we want to invest in. We have 3 athletic teams that had previously been funded through parents and private that we wanted to make part of the school budget to make everything consistent for all the student athletes. Brought some technology plans up to date, and then a little bit of money on the administrative assistant position. And then finally, there were some items that we brought into this year's, we were able to bring into the budget for this year, which alleviated some additional pressure on the fiscal 17 budget. So that's the general ed increases. The other core component of our increase comes from special education, which, of course, as you know, is federally mandated and locally delivered. We continue to operate under the premise that the more children that we can educate in our own school buildings, the better. It's not only better for them socially and in terms of their development, but it's actually financially a better decision for us as well. We have, for example, we have an educational assistant who will be coming as a student rises from 5th grade to the region. We'll bring that with that student a one-on-one aid. We have some increase in another special ed teacher, some additional occupational therapy hours, and some of the team chairs who are very instrumental in delivering the IEPs have also increased a little bit. We did try and indicate where those had budget benefit impact, which was pretty minimal this year. Next slide. And then, of course, we are always looking to increase our revenues with every opportunity. The state, we are beholden to what the state gives us. So that has gone up some, but of course never as much as we'd like it to go up. So that is up this year. As I said, we did increase our fees, which is the one of the levers that we can pull ourselves. Our revolving account went down slightly because our food services numbers weren't as strong, and that's another thing that we're going to be looking at in the upcoming years. And then we were fortunate to get some special ed grants from the government that helped offset some of the increases in cost. So those are the big drivers of the operating budget. Next slide, please. Bob mentioned our capital requirement. As he alluded to, we do have the on-site insight report, which has been instrumental in allowing us to look forward into our capital needs over the next few years. And that really drove our assessments for this year of what we needed. Of course, we go through each item by item to make sure that it's really necessary to do that capital expenditure in this given year, or whether it's something that could be done in a future year. After that entire exercise, which involved quite a bit of work from the facilities team, we ended up with a $287,000 request, of which Dover's share is $160,692. We'll jump to what exactly those items are, but the last bullet point is we have an intermunicipal agreement with Sherburne, which allows the town of Dover to pay for the capital items in whichever way the town chooses to pay. So we can bond, we can pay free cash. It's up to our town, and that's been in place for 3 years, which has given us all, I think, a great deal of financial flexibility. So the next 2 slides, or the next slide, is a list of the different items. I'm happy to answer questions on any specifics. I don't think I need to read them to you, but they are all, I mean, again, we go through a very rigid process of, do we need to do it now? Is it something that we can wait for a future year? And these were the items that the facilities team really felt should be invested in to keep the building up to its position in this year. So that's the state of the region. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah, sure.
I'm Bonnie Akins, 18 Greystone Road. Nice to see you, Dana.
Yes, you do.
I have 2 questions. The first is about special ed. I thought that Dover, within its school budget, was responsible for all special ed students and their costs. So why is it separated out in the regional budget?
Great question. So in the regional budget, we are responsible for all in-house special ed services
Okay.
that we have in our buildings. If they
Okay.
are out of district, they go to the Dover School Committee budget.
Okay, so that clears
Excellent.
that up
Yep.
for me. My second question has to do with numbers. How many are in the 6th grade this year and the 12th grade this year?
Do you have the enrollment number? We can get you that number.
Okay, and
Uh,
how many are you expecting next year
Right.
in the 6th grade and the 12th grade?
So I think we're still in the bubble, and we'll get you the exact numbers. They are starting to drop off a little bit in the middle school. The big wild card that I don't think any of us know what will happen is as enrollments are rising at the elementary school, whether that will start negating.
As enrollments are.
No, well, we've been having a lot of move-ins in both towns. So
Well, talk to me about kindergarten and first grade.
the 6th grade versus 12th grade.
So this year we have 172 in the 6th grade. We're graduating 175, hopefully. And currently in the highest grades in the region.
Coming up.
Exceptionally large number of Sherborne students who are finally graduating. Sherborne's enrollment bubble delayed Dover's enrollment bubble. So that's what's causing first the assessment to shift over to Sherborne, and now it's starting to shift back.
Yeah, and it
Right.
takes a couple years. I understand that thing. So next year, what are you expecting in 7 and 12?
Grade 6
Oh, 6, yeah.
167 and 161 is our projection for grade 12.
Okay.
And the big caveat is that we're seeing subsequent to the play out of the real estate recession is very unusual movement activity, I think, in both towns, particularly over in Sherborne, where they had entering kindergartners of 50 kids, and now they're over 70 grades 3 and 4.
Okay, so Sherburne's having a bubble. Okay.
Right, so, but,
But we're seeing it also with students from Dover.
right, right. So we're not ready to give into the bubble yet. We're not,
Yeah, no, there's a gradual trend at the moment. This is, a few kids here
Correct.
and there, and I'll stop there.
well, I think that I can certainly assure you that it's something that we all think about, and as we look out to future years, what in our educational model can be affected over time if that does continue to drop off, and what's the best way to continue the excellence of education while being fiscally responsible.
I know it's a complicated thing, but I thought it was interesting.
Definitely.
I think one other interesting thing to point out is since 2010, the high school enrollment is up 10%. And the high school really is the most expensive grades for us educated students. And where we become much more into guidance, activities, athletics, the whole range of things, a very complicated schedule to meet where you're teaching everything from advanced placement to skills.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So
Perfect.
as this up and down shift goes, but I just appreciate your telling me the numbers.
Absolutely. I think they're up on the website as well, if you want the specific by grades. Well, we can make sure it is. Oh, yeah.
I want to follow Bonnie's question, but with a separate one as well. The last time I can remember that we saw a long-term trend projection was when we did in 79, 80, and 81 at the local school level a complete listing of enrollments by grade so that we could do a cohort analysis looking not 1 or 2 years, but 5 or even 6 or 7 years. And I think that's what's lacking here, because while you can verbalize these, and while we can look in the town report that will be available at the time of town meeting, if it is consistently reported what the grade enrollments are, it doesn't give us a good sense of how those cohorts are moving year to year, and therefore projection. I'm not asking for that tonight. I'm saying to you, I think we should see that at time of town meeting.
Yeah, we do have that information in our packets on occasion, and it goes down through the pre-K level. So we can,
I personally worked with previous superintendent Steve Bliss to start to do that type of enrollment forecasting and looking at when we knew that enrollment levels were kind of progressing through elementary and into the middle school and then eventually the high school. And then the interim superintendent brought that discipline, which he very much depended on.
You know, I mean, at the time, some of the factors we felt that were necessary, obviously, were building permits. That's less of a factor today. There's far less developable land, but also the ages of the families that were moving in and the like. The other question I have, and it's totally missing, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, where you in the budget talk about current benefits. Yet the Warrant Committee very clearly pointed out that there is a very substantial unfunded pension liability. And given that the number of employees that the region employs is in fact the most substantial number of employees that we deal with and are some of the highest paid, I think your presentation is misleading because it doesn't tell us what type of costs we're going to be seeing with that in the future, particularly since the Massachusetts pension plan continues to use a grossly inflated actuarial interest rate, which misstates what we're going to have to be paying over the next 10 years. And I think the Warrant Committee has a right to see some expectation of what those costs are going to be as they play into the next years, because you're going to have to start paying out those pensions.
I'll give the short answer, and then Michael, since this is his wheelhouse, can supplement it. I think the short answer is that Dover Warrant, Sherburne Advisory, and Regional School Committee all agree that this is something that we all need to look at. It's not just a Regional School Committee issue, it's in conjunction with the towns. And we collectively need to come to a good solution for all of us. And I think we all want to make that a priority to figure it out. I think that our priority right now was to make sure that we had the operating budget that would allow us to keep the schools open. But I think that it's an area that we absolutely want to look at over time. Do you want to add to that, Michael?
Can I just add one clarification? All educator pensions are absorbed 100% at the state. Now, that doesn't mean that we aren't all collectively responsible for meeting those obligations.
So that's in a 403B?
No, it's a defined benefit plan in Massachusetts, wherever retirement system.
I see.
But again, the state fully funds that 100% and currently absorbs the full liability. So the region does have a liability for any support staff, non-educators, that work at the district. Just as each town, your support staff at Chickering or at Pine Hill are included in your local pension plans, and that's for custodians, healthcare, food service workers, education aides.
As far as the head count, I think what would be beneficial in seeing head counts is we have no statement here of what per enrollee costs are at each grade. And that's an excellent basis for making a judgment, because we all can understand, if you will, a tuition cost.
And we do have on our website a presentation we did with Dover Warrant and Sherburne Advisory on February 24th. And like was shown earlier, we did an analysis going back to fiscal 2010 to fiscal 2016. And for our core operating costs, the general education, administrators, transportation, things of that nature, our compound growth rate was 2.3% a year, and on a per student basis, it was 2% a year, because our enrollments are higher in 2016 than they were in 2010.
I'm not following it. Why would your per student costs go up because your number of students go up?
No, they went down. The cost was 2.6%. 2.6?
It was 2.3% for all costs.
Yes.
For our core costs in total, 2% per year on a per student basis.
Right.
It's benefits and it's the shift of educating
Right, so if you want to get to that presentation, if you have any questions on it, we'd be happy to answer them.
Well, the question really is it should it be a separate on your website review? I mean, we don't see a comprehensive. One other question, because as I understand it, in general, for Dover, special ed comes to about 25% of the enrollment across the board, all schools. I believe that's roughly the number.
I don't want to
I
put...
know it's a little
No.
bit less than Newton. Newton is in the same range.
Can we go to the assistant superintendent on that question? Because I don't want to...
They are posted on the DESE website, and I think it's around 18%, which is around the state average.
For all of our students or for? Okay.
Thank you, Karen.
And I'm sure that certainly have improvements around managing reporting and doing more work around
Yep.
diversity costs.
Yeah, and if I can just add something, I think the two items that you asked about, all that information on enrollment and on the OPAD, the regional school committee has shared that at prior, its budget open hearing, and it shared that information with the this year, so those are ongoing issues, and you guys have, I think, generated that data already. So thank you.
Can everyone in the audience hear everything that's being stated? Because a lot of us aren't using microphones, so I just...
Oh, now it's going to be problematic.
Raise your hands if you can't hear anything.
Any other
and you need
any other
anything
questions that we
repeated.
can answer on the regional budget? All right. I will turn it over to Dover.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Doug. Thank
Yes,
you,
Thank you,
Mark.
Dana. Thank you, Michael. Although the Dover School Committee does not have any special articles on this year's budget, it of course has its operating budget under Article 4 and its capital budget under Article 5. And by tradition, the Dover School Committee makes a presentation at open hearing. So I welcome Don Vittori to come up and present on behalf of the Dover School Committee.
Good evening, everyone. You'll see my presentation actually says March 3rd because we did a dress rehearsal of this at our own open hearing of the Dover School Committee on that date and mischanging the date. Next slide. Again, I just want to thank, as everyone did, the Dover School Committee and the administration, both at central office and at the Chickering building, for helping us with the budget process. Just to give you a little background, our budget was approached with acute appreciation with the town's finances. We took under consideration the guidance provided by Dover Warrant, which was a desire to provide level services in line with current enrollment, realizing, however, that we are not declining anymore. We are leveling off, if not increasing. And we'll talk about some of those numbers in the next couple of slides. Just to make it clear, our budget does not include healthcare costs. They're reflected in the overall town's budget. We do have some revenue that comes in specifically for the schools, and that's our Chapter 70 revenue, which we're projecting to be about $700,000 for this year, or for fiscal year 17. And they've already talked about a capital request, but just so you see the whole budget for Chickering, we did have $45,000 worth of capital request. Next slide. So we sort of manage our budget in two pieces, and this came up earlier in the questions. We have the Chickering school budget, which provides the education for now pre-K through 5th grade. And we also have the added district for the whole town, which covers pre-K up to the ages 22. And on this slide, you see sort of how it's broken out between pre-K and 5th grade, which is sort of under the programmatic review of the Dover School Committee, and the 6th through 22 is more under the programmatic review of the Regional School Committee. First, though, we'll talk about the Chickering budget, and if you would mind, next slide. So where does the Chickering budget go? This slide basically stays the same from year to year. Our biggest piece of the budget is salaries of 85%. We have regular education, transportation, 4%. Our supplies, purchase services, et cetera, of 5%. And then our buildings and grounds of 6%. Next slide. So looking at the Chickering School budget, we're looking at an increase of 2.6%, which is roughly $170,000. We're estimating our enrollment to be 452 children with 24 sections, and that's in addition to 15 pre-K. To put that in perspective, with last year's budget, we budgeted 436 students last year, and we currently have 470. So we did see a really large move-in, over 40 new children or students over this year, which was about 30 more than we had projected. So we are seeing a shift. If you remember last year, we did the slide where we showed over the 8 years we've been seeing a 25% decline. I think I couldn't redo that slide this year because we're actually seeing an increase, which is great for the school. Our contracts are in year 3. As the Warrant Committee pointed out, we will be negotiating this coming year. And then for all other non-contract staff, we budgeted 2%. So that makes up about $165,000 of our $170,000 increase. We are projecting to add 1 classroom teacher. It's a floating teacher right now because we're waiting to see how the enrollment will fall out. Our kindergarten is at its policy level right now. So if we get any more kindergartners in than we project, we probably would put it in kindergarten, but we're also seeing an increase in first grade. In addition, we're continuing to roll out our FLES program, the Spanish program, so we're adding 3rd grade, so that increases a 0.4 FTE to continue that programming. And I will add that the school committee had a day at school in the fall, and one of our favorite classes was Spanish. So I don't know if you have children that are involved in that program, but it's absolutely fabulous, and we just are in gratitude to the town for allowing us to add that to our curriculum. And if you remember, we added a pre-K last year, and so we are now taking that tuition that we are taking in, and that's actually funding $45,000 of the educational assistance, so that's decreasing our budget. And in addition, we're seeing 2 teacher retirements, but obviously they'll get replaced with replacements at lower than their seasoned teachers, so we're seeing $45,000 decrease from that. Next slide. So looking at average class size and per pupil costs, and again, you have to keep in mind that this does not include benefits or debt costs, because those are included in a separate budget. You can see where we stood with fiscal year 15 actual, and in parentheses is the enrollment. So for fiscal year 15, we had 476 students, so we were looking at a per pupil cost of around $13,600, and our average class size that year was 19. Then you can see our fiscal year 16 budget, where we had an estimated enrollment of 451, that includes the pre-K. We were looking at a $14,500 per pupil cost, and that was about an 18.8 average class size. However, we know that we're at enrollment of 484, again, that's with the pre-K, brings down the per pupil cost to $13,500, and we're really at the high end of our range right now, with our class sizes at 20.1. So putting that in perspective with where we're coming in for fiscal year 17, we're projecting 467 students with a per pupil cost of $14,390, and our class size is looking at about close to 19. If you look at fiscal year 15 actual compared to fiscal year 17 budget, it's about a growth of 2.75 per year. Next slide. So moving on to the second part of the Dover budget, which is special education, and I think it's just always good just to refresh of ourselves about the mandates and the funding for special education. So it is federally and state mandated that we educate students with disabilities from the ages of 3 to 22. Services need to meet the legal standards of free and appropriate public education and must be provided in the least restrictive environment. Our fiscal year 17 budget includes 36 students being placed out of district, and basically that's because we cannot provide the appropriate level of services required for their education in district. However, we do receive some funding to sort of offset these costs, and that's the circuit breaker reimbursement, and we'll talk about that in another slide. So in the next slide, I just put in the budget again just to refresh ourselves for out-of-district. Our total out-of-district budget for fiscal year 17 is close to $3.2 million. It's a small increase over last year, but when you see sort of the ins and outs, you'll see that there is a lot of activity. That's why sometimes you have to ask questions because it looks like it's a small decrease, but there's been a lot of stuff going on. Next slide. So basically less than 1% increase over 16. We're estimating, again, 36 out-of-district placements. In 16, we had budgeted for 32, but we actually had 37. We have 2 placements aging out and 2 who are leaving the district. That would have resulted, if everything else had stayed the same, of a tuition decrease of $687,000. We're projecting, or we actually already have 5 new placements. That's increasing our budget by $250,000. And then we've had some cases move from day programs to residential, and that is reflecting a tuition increase of $435,000. And then we also have to increase the existing tuitions by 3% based on the state increase. That's about $76,000. Next slide. So talking a little bit about circuit breaker, this is where the towns do have some relief from the state. Just to keep in mind, the budget numbers for our budget are gross, so it doesn't reflect the fact that we're getting any state reimbursement. So the town is eligible for circuit breaker, and how you calculate circuit breaker is that it is based on the amount of tuition, and it's just on tuition, that exceeds 4 times your foundation rate budget. And for us, say, I'm going to use rough numbers, say our foundation budget is $10,000, 4 times that is $40,000. So if you have a $100,000 tuition bill, off the top we have to cover $40,000. That leaves $60,000 that's eligible for circuit breaker. Of that, it's mandated by the state, although it's not always fully funded, at 75%. So we would get $45,000 of circuit breaker against that $60,000. So the $100,000 tuition would cost us $55,000. So that's just a quick sort of understanding of how circuit breaker works. In fiscal year 17, we're expecting $1 million in circuit breaker. So that definitely helps offset that $3.2 million budget. So we, obviously, as Dana mentioned, we strive to keep as many children as we can in districts. So a couple of things that we've done over the last several years are, well, as of last year, we created this pre-K classroom. Had we not had the pre-K classroom last year, or this year, we'd have 7 more children out of district than we have now. And the good news is that of all those students that were in the pre-K, they're all staying and matriculating onto kindergarten at Chickering. And we're budgeting 5 of those, for our preschool next year, 5 of those students are on IEPs. We've also engaged a language-based specialist consultant, both at the region and locally. We are definitely implementing a lot of RTI, and that's what the pre-K program does. If you can get to the students early in their education and help them, support them, they have a much better chance of being able to stay in district. And we continue to look at all things that we can do across the 3 districts to maximize our cost-sharing efficiencies. Next slide. Again, just want to thank everyone for their support, and our budget presentation is on our website, along with some other detailed budget pieces of information that we didn't bring forward this evening. Any questions? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Before we move on, I just want to thank all of our presenters for saying next slide. I know it's greatly appreciated by Mr. Clark up here, and it's making for a very smooth presentation. Up next are Articles 14 and Article 15, which are related, and they relate to Dover becoming designated as a green community, as Mr. Jack Donahue will explain to you.
Thank you,
And
Doug.
he represents the Long Range Planning Committee.
I'm Jack Donahue, Chairman of the Long Range Planning Committee. Briefly, the Long Range Planning Committee is an advisory committee, and we generally get requests from the selectmen to pursue, investigate an issue every year or two. A year ago, they asked us to look into the green community designation, and my response was, well, what is that? Well, we've learned a lot over the last year. The interesting thing about this program is it's not going to cost you any money. As a matter of fact, I hope to get us some money. The first slide is just an overview of the program. It's administered by the Mass Department of Energy, and in exchange for working towards energy conservation, we receive grant money. Of the 351 cities and towns, already 155 cities and towns have adopted the green designation program. Sherburne, in particular, adopted it in 2011, and what makes that relevant and interesting is that our town planner, Gino Carlucci, who is here, Gino works with Sherburne also. We actually share our town planner with Sherburne and Dover. Gino went through the whole thing in 2011, so we're at a great advantage having him available to guide us through it. Sherburne's already received over $200,000 in grants. There's an interesting schedule which is connected to the website, which shows exactly what the funding has provided for. For example, in Sherburne, they received $137,000 initially for evaluation of the Pine Hill School, the fire station, the library, conversion of an existing boiler to oil and gas, and then the last one they did was to fund energy conservation measures also at Pine Hill School. So it's energy conservation oriented. We select a project every year or two. The initial funding will be $125,000 approximately. I looked at another similar town, Weston. Weston has received two grants of $138,000 and $243,000 in the last couple of years. This program has been around since 2010, and it's gaining traction, and as you can see from the numbers, many towns are adopting it. Weston's program, they did an energy conservation study at 4 schools and at the fire headquarters and received a big grant for that. Again, they did a boiler replacement at the middle school with a gas-fired high-energy efficiency boiler replacing the old. So it's all about energy conservation and receiving funding as a result. To do this, we need to adopt or approve 2 bylaws at town meeting. One pertains to zoning and the other to the building code. Would you go to the second slide, please? Article 14 is one of the 2 that we have to approve. It's called the stretch code. It's basically an updated version of the building code. It's a more contemporary approach towards it. It's performance-based. And I've talked to, well, our building inspector is actually here tonight if there's any particular questions of details. But my discussion with him is that there's not going to be any significant measurable difference between obtaining building permits and complying with the building code if we adopt the appendix. I also talked with Sherburne, the 2 building inspector, the former building inspector, Henry Fontaine. I spoke with him, no, he's the current one, excuse me, and he told me he has no problem working with it. His builders in town have no problem working with it, and it's been easy to work with. The former building inspector in Sherburne, Felix Zemmel, he now is the head guy at the state. So he moved on to a very big position, and he worked with the stretch code for many years, and he found it very reasonable to work with. So we don't expect any problems working with builders in town, and I believe this is only going to apply to new homes. It's not going to apply to alterations or remodeling. So that is a significant issue, significant clarification. Now, we've also the planning board has played a huge role in this. We've worked with them for the past year because we've got a zoning change. Anytime you have a zoning change, you need planning board participation. The planning board has already had their public hearing, which leads us to the next slide. One of the criteria for adopting this program is designating a certain area for energy conservation. And we believed that the best way to do this was to find a site that was suitable for a solar field, for solar panels. That's one of the 3 categories which we can utilize. And over at the transfer station, many of you have been to the transfer station. To the right of the transfer station is a large parcel. Actually, it's the old town disposal area, which was capped many years ago. And it's flat, it's open, it's all grass, and it's very suitable. It's an ideal location for this. So if you go to the next slide, please, you can see it. The area surrounded in the outer perimeter in green, that's the 14, or rather 17 acres that we're talking about rezoning. And that's what will be at town meeting under Article 15. The transfer station is the section in the middle, the gray area, but we're going to rezone the whole area, hopefully, and once it's rezoned and approved at town meeting, we've complied with the necessary criteria to be designated a green community, and then the grants begin. The interesting thing about this property, except for the transfer station, is that it's not owned by us. It's owned by Hale Reservation, and Hale has been in the loop. Mark Sarah with the planning board has spoken to them. They're very enthusiastic for us to rezone it. We don't participate in any of the private aspects of what might happen over there. Hale owns the property. They perhaps may negotiate with a service provider for solar energy, and whatever deal is struck by them is irrelevant to us. All we're doing is rezoning it. We pay nothing, it costs us nothing, and all we're interested in is the grant money. Mark, do you want to expand on this to any degree? I know you have the next article, so if you think I left anything out, please. Okay. So that's pretty much it. It's all about energy conservation. Our committee unanimously is in favor of it. I believe the selectmen are. I know the planning board also is. So we hope you support it at town meeting. It'll take a 2/3 vote. Questions? Yes.
My name's Lee Scott. I live in the Haven Terrace. What are you planning to do with the grant money once you get it?
Well, that's to be determined in the future by the selectmen. Right now, we know there's numerous projects out there that it can be utilized for. I heard we need new boilers across the street. That might be a suitable place for it, but it all depends. That's not being determined by us at this time.
Okay. I just hope that we use it for actual energy conservation.
It has to be used for
Okay. Great.
that criteria. Any more?
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Okay, we are moving on to Article 16, which is a planning board article, and Mark Serro is going to present on that on behalf of the planning board, and it concerns site plan reviews and some inconsistencies in the existing town bylaws.
Thanks, Doug. Mark Sarro, 9 Colonial Road, and Chair of the Planning Board. I'll be brief on this one. This is an article proposed by the Planning Board to clean up the site plan review portion of our bylaw currently. This portion of our bylaw is currently, you can go to the next slide. is currently 3 sections of the bylaw, and we are consolidating those 3 sections into one. It's a whopping 6 pages currently. We're condensing that to 4. But there are lots of benefits of bringing these 3 sections, which are spread out in the current town code, into one section, which will make the process clearer for all involved. For those of you who don't know, site plan review is the process the planning board follows in order to regulate uses of land in certain areas of the town, which are either permitted or allowed under the schedule of uses, or the use section under the bylaw. There are 2 types of special site plan review. There's preliminary site plan review of very simple projects that don't require extensive detailed engineering drawings and all of that, and there's full site plan review, which is more involved. This bylaw would consolidate those 3 sections covering both of those types of site plan review into one. We can go to the next slide. And so this slide summarizes all of the changes under the current bylaw. I won't speak in detail to each one. There's a handout in the back that's 1 page that summarizes them as well. Both the handout and the bylaw itself are available on the town website and have been for a while. The planning board's held a public hearing on this, but we're still accepting comments and questions or suggestions at any time. As I said, it consolidates 3 sections of the bylaw. Section 185.36, 185.37, and 185.46.1. And I could answer questions about what they do in detail, but they regulate uses in the district all around us right now, the business district here in the center of town, business manufacturing district, and the medical professional district. The new bylaw is better organized and explained than the current one. It clearly explains the purpose of the bylaw, the applicability of the bylaw, key terms that are operative in how site plan review works that are undefined in the current bylaw. The process that we go through, it literally walks someone through step by step what the process is, the requirements for both preliminary and full site plan review, and it's very specific about the criteria that the planning board uses in order to evaluate site plans. It lists 9 specific criteria, for example, that are there. And it also talks about how the town, after site plan review, affirms that a site has been developed in conformance with the approval of a site plan, usually with an as-built plan. So we get a plan that says how something will be developed, and then we get a plan that shows us how it was developed, and we confirm that it was developed in accordance with site plan review. This bylaw change doesn't do anything at all to change the uses that require site plan review. So if someone has a proposal to use a particular property here in the business district, medical professional or manufacturing district, all of the same things that currently require site plan review will continue to require site plan review. There's no change there at all. What does change under the current bylaw are the specifics of what triggers site plan review. And the proposed bylaw is clearer about what those triggers are, and they're specifically laid out in a section of the bylaw. And they relate to, if I had to summarize, rather than getting particular about whether a change is a substantial change, which we talk about a lot, constitutes substantial change, and part of that was defined based on changing this certain amount of square footage of a building or a percentage of the gross area of a building or of the parking and exterior area of a lot. The new bylaw essentially says that if there are changes to a building that are visible more or less from the public view, and they're outside of what would be considered routine maintenance of the building, then at least preliminary site plan review should be done. And if there's any question, someone should come in and talk to the planning board about whether that site plan review is required, and we can start a process of figuring out whether it's preliminary only that's sufficient and check that box, or whether it would be full site plan review required. That's one change under the current under the proposed bylaw from current. A couple of other changes worth noting are that the current bylaw only allows the planning board to accept a preliminary site plan, so for a very relatively simple project, or to reject that and have the applicant come back with a different plan. It doesn't allow the planning board to make some suggestions for small changes in that plan and approve it with those conditions. And so this bylaw would do that, which speeds up approval for simple site plan projects. It also allows for the possibility of abutter notification in full site plan review. So for projects that go beyond preliminary site plan review, this bylaw puts the planning board on the same sort of timetable as a special permit process, which allows for a butter notification, and therefore the planning board gets more public input into the process. The current bylaw actually expressly says that that kind of a notification and period are not required for site plan review. But full site plan review frequently brings people into the planning board. We want that input. So this proposed bylaw would allow for that timing. And it also makes the timing of full site plan reviews consistent with special permit review. So glad to answer any questions. The planning board's open for any comments. Our next meeting is next Monday night, and the planning board office is open 3 days a week. So appreciate any comments or suggestions you all have.
Are there any questions on the site plan review? Okay, thank you very much, Mark. We're going to jump ahead a little bit, go out of order, and address Article 21. That concerns stormwater management and erosion control. That is a regulation that's been promulgated by the EPA, and by law, Dover has to comply with it. It's akin to an unfunded mandate. People have any questions about it? Gino is here, and I believe that he can speak to them. And if not, we can proceed. No questions about Article 21? Okay. All right, that brings us to Article 17, which is an article authorizing the Board of Selectmen to sell the 4-acre parcel at 46 Springdale that contains the existing house. That house will be sold as is, except that the septic system will be completely replaced. That will be the only work done to that. The remaining 23 acres will remain general municipal use land. There won't be any dedicated purpose for that land at this time. All that this article does is authorize the Board of Selectmen to sell the existing structure as is, with the exception of a new septic system. And I open the floor for questions on that.
Charlie Long, 121 Walpole Street. My question is, why aren't we selling the whole property? The whole purpose of acquiring this property was to prevent it from being developed. And if you sell the whole property with a conservation restriction on the major portion of it, you can sell a reasonably valuable piece of property. On the other hand, if you just sell the house as it is and the town keeps the rest of the property, then you've got a very difficult sale. I mean, you're talking selling a house to somebody, you're saying, well, you got a right of way in front of your house, and the town owns the property behind, and the town is just general property, so they can do whatever they want. I don't think that's a very easy sale, and I don't see any reason for it. Why does the town need to continue owning the property behind it? We don't have any particular purpose for it. The town owns plenty of land anyway. There's enormous amounts of conservation land. The whole purpose of this was to prevent it from being developed. If you put a conservation restriction on it and then sell the whole property, we'll get much more of our money back. We've given somebody a $4 million profit on the sale of his house, and it'd be nice if we could get some of this back. And as far as preventing development of this property, to tell you the truth, putting a conservation restriction on it, selling it to a private party, is more likely to prevent it from ever being developed than the town continuing to hold it.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Is there anyone here who is prepared to speak to that question? Thank you, Mr. Dolly.
Thank you. Jim Dolly, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. I don't know which way to face. Thanks for the question. Part of the reason the Board of Selectmen put forth this special warrant article this year is from the overwhelming desire for the townspeople through a series of votes, I believe it's 3 series of votes now, to, number one, buy the property, first and foremost, probably to stop that 40B development. Secondly, we formed a committee over the last 9 months, the Springdale Study Committee, who then did a survey to all the townspeople. And an overwhelming response to that particular survey was to keep the greater portion of the property open for future use and to sell off the front 3 or 4 acres as it is now. That's why the article is in place. We will not ask for a conservation restriction on that because we want future townspeople to decide what's the best use of that, and we don't want to put a restriction on that. To conject whether we're going to sell it at a good price, the market will dictate what the number comes in at. It will be an open auction process, I believe, if the town so desires in the Maytown meeting. Does that answer all your questions? Or?
Well, I think the real question is what we can get back for this property, and what's the most effective way to protect it from being developed in the future. And doing a conservation restriction will protect it in the future. I don't think there was any great sentiment for the town saying, oh no, the town has to keep owning it. The sentiment was that it be restricted from development, not necessarily that the town be the owner to do it. And it seems to me, if you compare what you could sell the whole property for subject to a restriction, compared to what you could sell the property, just the house, I think you're talking a very substantial difference in value, and we're going to get much less back of what we spent on the property. It just doesn't seem to make very good economic sense to do it this way.
I can't guess what the future holds as far as the auction results, if in fact we go to auction, and to the extent, the market will dictate that.
Does this 3 to 4 acres that you're going to be selling include the outbuildings?
Yes, that was one thing I was going to correct Doug on. It includes the main house, there's a secondary house, there's a barn, there's a horse paddock, and a pool house and pool. Yes, includes all those. Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Can you give us an idea of the amount of money you think we can get?
I'm not a realtor, so I can't. I don't believe we've had an estimate. Well, we've had a lot of people talk, but I'm not. I would not. Pardon me? Absolutely.
And when will you have that? A town meeting?
I don't know that. No, we will not.
And what do we spend? 5 million?
5.5 million. Yes, 5.55 million. That's correct.
And once you sell it, would there be a potential that elderly housing could go there?
Again, that would be for the future townspeople to decide, not the selectmen.
That's possible.
That's correct. Anything's possible. That's the way we're structuring the sale.
How can you make this proposal at town meeting without having an appraisal of what you're thinking of selling?
Well, again, we can have an appraisal, but again, the market will dictate the value of that property.
But you'll have an idea.
Yes, I think we all have an idea of what the number is. I mean, it's 4 acres in the middle of Dover with 2 buildings.
Something you're not sure how much for a septic system.
Well, septic system's 75,000, David? 50,000, thank you. Septic system's 50,000. That will ask for an appropriation at town meeting for.
Okay, I would urge you to come with an appraisal to town meeting.
Well, you can come up with a market analysis. An appraisal is somewhat different than a market analysis.
Yes, I understand that.
Okay.
But I think a number from a professional might be a good idea.
I think that's a good idea. Thank you for that. If there's no other questions? Yes, Jack.
Jim, do you mind if I ask a question from here?
I think we can all hear you.
The Springdale Study Committee over the past year has worked long and hard to come up with a recommendation, an analysis of all the data that was assembled. Is there a written report of the Springdale Study Committee available, which I know there's probably a majority and a minority view. Is there a summary of what they've concluded and assimilated?
Absolutely. David, is that still posted on the website?
I don't know the answer.
Okay, it was posted on the website, and we will repost it on the website prior to town meeting. Thanks for that question.
Yes.
Just 2 factual questions. Are you going to be selling it with a historical restriction or not?
I don't know if there is a historical restriction on the house, so I would say no then.
Okay, so it could be torn down. tear down, because there isn't any historical,
Mhm.
other than the demolition delay bylaw.
Yeah.
Why put in a septic system for a house that has X number of bedrooms if someone wants to put a much larger house with more beds?
That's a good question. And through our very informal discussions with 3 local realtors, we thought it was in our best interest to replace the failed septic system to put it on the market.
You don't have to, as I understand the law. You could sell it.
That's correct.
And last,
But we thought it would be an easier sale if we did fix it.
the only other question I have is I heard that there was some talk about rerouting the driveway also to the house. Is that off the?
That is part of the discussion. I haven't seen the plans that the planning board put together yet, but that is part of the discussion. Is Gino here? Oh, Gino's here. Good, thank you.
We have a copy of the property boundaries, but does not show the driveway. But yes, the plan calls for a new driveway to the house in the beginning portion and then rejoin the existing driveway.
Good.
And the entrance, the current entrance would be on the town portion of the land, and then it would veer off onto the back property from here.
Who pays for the road?
Who pays for the, what?
Who pays for the new road?
It would be a driveway.
Who pays for the new driveway?
Town will.
The town pays for it with what?
Without talking about it.
Totally a budget.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Hi, so, I guess this is going back to John. Are you proposing an easement over the retained town land to access this 4 acres you're planning on selling?
No, it would be on the field portion of the land that the town would still own. The driveway would be separated, in other words, at a certain point, the entrance would stay with the town.
My question is, the access for the land you're selling, will that access cross town-owned land? Or will it be its own access on its own fee-owned land of the parcel?
No, the house will retain ownership of its own assets. It would be on.
It doesn't cross the town?
It does not cross the town.
All set?
Let's clarify this. The access to the town land, is that going to be across the property that's being sold or
They'll
not?
each be separate.
So it's going to be a separate fee ownership. Now, that's going to be next to the brook, it's going to be the access for the town. But that's not going to be part of what's contemplated to be sold.
Correct.
So it may be separate town-owned land, but it's still going to be right out in front of the house. So you're selling a house with a town access right in front of it.
Well, not really, it's to the left.
Not part of it, but right in front of it, right?
To the left, to the left.
A technical question. Now that the way the article has been proposed, is it in order in the town meeting to propose that the entire property be sold? Or by the nature of the way the article was posed, are we restricted from doing that?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Could you rephrase it, please?
Is it possible for the town meeting to decide to sell the entire property rather than just the 4 acres? Or are we restricted from considering just the 4 acres by the nature of the article?
Procedurally, I think almost any motion can be brought on the floor of town meeting by special motion. But I am just speculating that that's a question properly addressed to Mr. Rapetti, the town moderator. Not to put you on the spot, Jim.
Charlie, it does say in any other action relative there too, so usually that does allow an amendment. But the question would be, as you know, whether there's a sufficient notice with respect to the scope of an amendment that would allow for the sale of the entire property. And since this warrant article refers to just 4 acres, I would be concerned that there isn't sufficient notice to the town meeting that would allow the town meeting to consider a sale of all the property. But it's certainly a question that we can pose to town council for their opinion. I would expect that it's not going to be permitted based on this language, but we can consult town council and give you a definitive answer.
Well, it struck me that way also. It seems that it's been a mistake to put
this together with that restrictive language, so we can't consider the various options. It's very unfortunate that town meeting is not going to be able to take this up in its entirety and has to just be restricted to what's being proposed.
Well, if I may, once again, refer to the long, hard work that the Springdale Study Committee did for the past 9 months, including surveying the whole town and what the results were. So it's not somewhat of a surprise to me, certainly this evening, what this article says and what we have been talking about for the last year and a half. All set. Thank you.
Question.
Where?
Ron Peterson, Springdale. A question, Jim, for Jim Repetti. Could the article be tabled till next year?
We can always dismiss an article, and dismissal is never with prejudice, so we're always able to consider the article at a subsequent town meeting. But technically, that would require a dismissal. It would require a motion to dismiss the article.
One other hand? Yep, two other hands.
Crowley, could you get in your appraisals for the entire property?
Again, a market analysis and appraisal are two different things. I would ask for a market analysis. Yes. And
What's the difference?
Well, one is an appraisal. It's you hire some guy. Market analysis. We go to 3 local realtors and they tell us their opinion what they go to market with. It's relative.
What's the market analysis?
Again, if you go to sell your home, the realtor's going to tell you, I think I can get X dollars, versus the bank will appraise it for another number.
But the
It's just a
bank is an
process.
appraisal. An appraiser is a licensed appraiser, not
Right.
a bank appraiser.
Yeah, I'm not
They're a
understanding that
special
part.
profession.
I understand. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So follow up to the question that Jonathan above actually mentioned. Was there ever an option that was posed to the entire town as a community that we could sell the entire lot with some type of protection agreement? Was that ever proposed?
At a town meeting? No.
To the public? Was that one of the options that the public was given? Because my experience was, I was told, what would you do with the property as a public land? The option that I've never heard was to sell it with a contingency in place, as John and next thing you mentioned.
We're not selling with contingency.
Well, the conservation restriction.
Yeah.
Was that ever brought up as an option?
It was a lot of different things have brought up. Yes, they have.
Mr. Donahue.
I better come over this time. I want to follow I welcome the company, Jack. Excuse my back. I just can't resist commenting on this because I drive by the property 10 times a day. This is a beautiful piece of property, and one piece is mutually interdependent upon what happens with the other piece. I know we bought it for a lot of money, and we're probably under some pressure to receive some money to pay off some debt. I understand that aspect of it, and that's probably what's driving this. But until we know what the left hand is doing with the right hand, I just see it's really problematic. Charlie is right about his observation about selling off the house. The normal buyer is want to know, what's going to happen over here? Well, we don't know. What are the possibilities? Playing fields, housing. Somebody talked about tabling this thing. I think, except for the issue of driving the money to pay back some debt, I think this needs more evaluation so the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. So I think putting it off makes an awful lot of sense. That's just my personal opinion.
Yes, in the back.
Just a question of clarification. When we purchased the property, the financing of the acquisition cost was on a 2-year short-term bills. It's my recollection, please correct me, that we will be otherwise entering into a bonding this next fiscal year to support that debt. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, that the bands are the bond anticipation notes.
5 years. They can be rolled over for 5 years.
So in fact, if the article is dismissed, we are not exposing ourselves to the increased cost of the bonding transaction itself and the bonds. We, in fact, could continue under the current financial support of the short-term bond anticipation groups. So that pressure is actually not yet facing us. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dolly, and thank you, everyone, for the questions. I mean, this is really what open hearing is all about. The warrant committee does not have any special articles on the warrant this year. These committees, all the articles are being presented tonight, and tonight is the time to ask questions. The warrant committee hasn't made any decision about any of these articles, and we're here tonight to listen and to provide as much information as we can and to identify the people who will provide information so that these questions can be asked. This is the opportunity to ask questions along with town meetings. So I think that was a very healthy, robust discussion. Before we move on to Article 18, I would just ask that I would remind people just to please state your name and address when you come up to the microphone. And also, please keep in mind that this is being televised and will be posted on YouTube as well. So with that, I will, Article 18 involves the Friends of the Dover Greenway and giving the Board of Selectmen the authority to enter into a lease with the MBTA. And with that, I will turn it over to the Friends of the Dover Greenway. I'm not sure if it's Rob Bunn or Kevin Ban who's presenting.
Actually, we both of us.
Okay.
We have Marco Zitelny and I'll wait until I'm here. We have Marco Zitelny and Alan Moss as well, who can help answer some questions if necessary. Hi folks, my name is Kevin Ban. I live at 7 Pleasant Street. I'm the president of the Friends of the Dover Greenway, and tonight we'd like to talk to you about our vision for this path. Next slide, Bill. So for a moment, I think I'd like to shift the attention to the right side of the screen as you're looking at it. I think many of you know that place. You might bike on it while you're at the Cape. On the weekends, you may go over to Holliston. Now you can go to Needham, actually. They're up and running with the rail trail. That place on the right is a safe place. That's a place where our children can ride their bikes, and we don't have to worry about them getting hit by a car. It's a place where young parents can push a stroller. It's something we almost never see. It's a place where our seniors can meet in their own community and safely walk along a flat path without fear of tripping over a root. That place is a connector. It connects everyone in this room and everyone in our community together. It connects us to better health, and it connects us to a beautiful piece of property. That place over there on the right connects us to Wildwoods, a place that many of us have never been, and 246 Springdale, which we just talked about. That place on the right makes Dover a better place to live. And that place on the right gets rid of the place on the left, which is abandoned, which has creosote ties, and which has a rail which serves us no purpose. So as we move forward, I want you to think about what that place could be. Bill, next slide.
Running north to south, the abandoned MBTA railway cuts through the heart of Dover. Not used for over 10 years now, the Friends of the Dover Greenway, a local not-for-profit group started by Dover residents, is taking steps to convert the railway to a recreational path serving all age groups.
idea. You can also go to your friend's houses without having to bother your parents.
While the benefits of a recreational path often make sense to families with young children, the Dover Greenway would also be an ideal safe path for older members of our community.
One person in particular I think represents one of the groups that the Greenway would be really helpful for is my grandmother. She's too old to really walk on wooded trails anymore. She has trouble with the roots, but she really likes the feeling of being able to walk in the woods surrounded by trees and in nature, and the Greenway would be a great opportunity for people like her to be able to walk in the woods.
The Friends of the Dover Greenway understands that people living along the trail will be those most impacted by its development. Many of those folks see this project as a great opportunity.
My name is Rob Butt. I'm standing here behind my house on Old Drive in Dover on the abandoned MBTA rail bed that I think we have a fantastic opportunity to turn into a multi-use recreational path for the people of Dover. And as an abutter, I think it offers sort of special benefits to folks who are fortunate enough to live close to the trail, because who's going to use it more than we are? I just can't imagine how many times we'll be coming out our back door during the summer, walking up town center to get ice cream, and that would nothing would make me happier than that is my favorite memory of what is left for Dover.
The Greenway safely connects popular town destinations, including Chickering School, the library, Town Hall, Dover Market, Dover Cafe, Wildwoods, and the Dover Sherborne Middle School and High School.
We need a place for our families and our community to be together outside in nature in a safe environment. Please consider joining us in this effort.
Thanks, Bill. Next slide. So I think we touched already on a bunch of the benefits that come from a greenway that passes through the town. One thing I really want to point on is, what if we don't do this? The rail was abandoned or left by MBTA over 10 years.
I know we can look at what's been found in other areas. A lot of the trails have not been in existence for a very long time, and the truth is we don't know exactly what we're going to come across. Everybody knows that there are contaminants along the rail bed. I guess the higher level of contaminants are found on trails where freight was transported. Our little rail line, it transported freight and customers. So we know that contaminants are there. The MBTA knows that the contaminants are there. And the most common contaminants would be, and I know you have seen a list of them already, asbestos, arsenic, petroleum, creosote from the wood that's there. And sorry, I'm nervous.
You know, can I, to turn
No,
that
I'd like
into
to
a
make my
question-
point,
Oh,
if
I'm
I
sorry.
could, just
Because
because I'd
we
just
have
like to get
licensed
through
site
it.
professionals here tonight to talk about the environment.
I understand, and I've seen all the research that you've posted on the website, and a lot of it comes from the same sources. I found other information that I'd just like to get put before the committee, if I could, please. Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
The other thing I wanted to say is that in any construction project, you're going to come across problems. You're going to experience delays. You're going to come across issues that you were not aware of before you began the whole process. In this case, it could mean a disaster for the town. And what I mean by that is, if we come across contaminants, even when the EPA does studies, they make mistakes. I have an 11-page document here, and it goes over the practices that they recommend. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the practices that they, and the different steps that they recommend, but if you haven't, I respectfully ask that you do so, because they're very detailed, and it leaves a lot of space and scope for health issues. A point that we came across is in Millis now they're building a new police station. They came across contaminants. This was unexpected. What did they do? They had to shut down the complete construction site. They covered the entire area with a tarp. All construction workers were removed from the site, and at the moment the estimated cost increase is over $1 million for that contamination. We say, usually, I know in the presentation, usually any problems that develop are seen within the first 5 years. In Adams, Massachusetts at the moment, they are contemplating now, because of the cost increase, a 1-mile extension to the trail that they've already been using, and they came across contaminants. Again, at the moment, the estimated cost increase is $1.1 million. So I understand that it sounds wonderful, it sounds great. The truth is we do not know what we are going to come across. Let me see if I have anything else. Oh yes, another thing that I found, and this had to do with Bridgewater. When you get cancer clusters, when you get concerns about health in different areas, they go back and they look at possible areas to research further. And the 3 areas that they looked at immediately were the rail bed and 2 industrial areas. And I think that says enough. I'm wondering why, without knowing anything about what truly lies underneath the soil and at the back of my house and at the back of lots of people's properties, we don't know what's there. And the issue about capping it and keeping it safe, in your own feasibility study you say there has to be restricted access to the trails, because if people try to get on from their own backyard, as I usually do, if you get on from your own backyard or you access different points, there is a danger of contamination from areas at the edges of the soil. In the EPA documentation they say children should not be allowed to play by the edges of the path, dogs digging, people eating their food. This is a safety concern. That has not been addressed. I know the chances are very, very low, you say. I don't agree, because you don't know what's there. So why would we take on this risk, expect the town to sign a lease, and we do not have accurate information? Thank you.
I think there are 2 points there, if I may. One, we have Paul McKinley, who is a licensed site professional, who actually is quite knowledgeable in this, Dover resident, and has deep experience with rail trails. So I think, Paul, I'd rather have you address that question.
Yeah, sure. My name is Paul McKinley, 17 Cedar Hill, and I'm actually here with a couple of my colleagues. We're licensed site professionals. We are licensed by the state. There's a select group of us. We actually do the assessment and remediation of oil and hazardous materials. My particular specialty is actually rail beds. I do both rail trails, and I work for the MBTA, so I'm on both sides of the table and have a lot of experience. So the concerns that were raised, they're certainly valid concerns. MassDEP has a very elegant policy. I've actually talked to the author of the policy, and it actually assumes that there's contaminants on the rail bed, whether they're there or not, that's to be determined, but it's a proactive policy to actually encapsulate those contaminants. So to the point that was raised, I mean, there very well may be some contaminants there, and they're presently in the rail bed. So by enacting this project, you in effect encapsulating and removing risk. Our regulations are all about risk, and so really what this is doing is proactively encapsulating that risk and removing any potential for exposure to those contaminants. So the project is certainly a benefit with respect to the contaminants, besides removing the creosote ties and a potential source of contaminants. If there were contaminants there, we would encapsulate them. So, people could potentially be exposed to contaminants if they were there. And this policy, if enacted, and it's a proactive and fairly elegant policy to deal with these long linear projects to proactively encapsulate the contaminants. So we're all here, the 3 of us, licensed site professionals, to really advocate for this project, because it really is a relatively simple and straightforward process to address those contaminants if they are present.
Steve's question, Ted Kramer, 31 Center Street. So given that you're going to work with the MBTA as well, why is the MBTA, as part of the lease agreement, shifting the liability for all this remediation to the town? And how do we get our arms around what is the $1 million potential problem or $5 million or $8 million? And how do we think about that?
Sure. So, MBTA is, I think, maybe this is something you guys can address, that MBTA is really advocating for the more beneficial use of the rail trail. So if contaminants are there, again, Mass DEP, the policy is an MBTA's policy. It's actually Mass DEP's policy to help facilitate the beneficial reuse of these rail trails. So again, the author of the policy's intent was really to come up with an elegant, proactive approach. So MBTA is really, I'm just, I work for them. But I'm also, in working for rail trails, I think it's a, approach to encapsulate the contaminants and really get it back to beneficial reuse.
But it's still a responsibility. It should be indemnity.
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. And we can.
Marco, actually, may I introduce Marco Zatelny? Why don't you introduce yourself and speak to that issue?
Marco Zatelny, Brookfield Road. The lease actually does not shift the risk to the town. The lease shifts the risk to the town if the town elects not to take the environmental insurance policy for the first 5 years. And so based on how the underlying statutes work and then how the leases are drafted, and each town's lease is drafted a little bit differently, but the primary point for the lease is not to shift liability to the town for environmental issues. It's just if the town chooses not to take on the $50,000 5-year insurance policy, then liability that may exist at the MBTA would contractually shift to the town. But we think that that's entirely mitigated by the insurance policy.
And then at years...
I can't speak for the town.
Is this a follow-up question for Marco, or is it a separate question? Okay.
Melissa Greener, 31 Center Street. I was just wondering if the town has confirmed with their own attorneys that the liability doesn't come back to us if there are environmental issues. And are we able to do any soil sampling prior to accepting the lease on the land?
So it's an important issue for us because regardless of where you live or whether you intend to use the trail or not, the environmental concerns are important. There is a memo that was drafted by the town's lawyers for the Rail Trail Committee back in 2012 or 13 that addresses that, and we've brought that to the attention of the selectmen and encouraged them to follow up with the town lawyers because it's just a short 2-page memo that summarizes the issue and the mitigation for that issue. And so I think that there's more work being done on that to make sure that that's the case, but I think that that's for the selectmen to answer, but we have brought that to their attention.
Tom Crowley, Cedar Hill Road. You should all know that the railroad companies have sprayed insecticides and pesticides on the rail bed for years. And so contaminants are there. I wish I could tell you specifically what they were, but everybody knows that they sprayed many, many years. And creosote from the ties are going to be an excavation problem. Maybe other insecticides and pesticides that could be discovered what's there. I don't want to walk on that rail bed. I don't know what's there. We can walk in Peabody Woods without a problem. We have 1,000 acres of woods that are out there and available for children. My children walked in those woods 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when they were young kids. So this is a very expensive proposal that we're not being told what the cost will be. You're saying you're going to do it. Where's the money? Thank you.
No, thank you, sir. It's a good point. We are asking the town to capture the lease for $1 per year, $99. We're also willing to donate that amount. But it will be on the Friends of the Dover Greenway to raise the funds to realize this path. That must be clear. We have a period of time in which we can do that. If we were unable to raise the funds, then the lease reverts back to the MBTA. The point being, we will raise these monies, and then if in a worst-case scenario, if we're unable, it goes back to the MBTA and nothing has changed.
Right, because to your point, like, the town's not going to be able to spend money, the town won't be able to spend money unless it's approved at town meeting. And so we're not asking for any money now, and I think we're highly confident that we'll be able to raise the funds to implement, to ensure, and to maintain the trail. And there's no opportunity for sort of backdoor spending because if, again, the town won't be able to spend it unless something were to come to town meeting, and we don't have any intention of doing that.
Doug, should I recognize people, or I see different hands going up, or do you want to?
Let me recognize people. Rest assured, everyone is going to get called on and have their say. So if I don't see you right away, you will get called on. Just please keep putting up your hand. I saw this gentleman first, and...
Terry Clark again. It strikes me that some 4 decades ago, I was an abutter to the rail trail because I lived on Knollwood Drive, and my kids used to watch the freight trains, which did go by there. And when I was younger, I used to ride the Bud car in to get to school. So I'm very familiar with it. I'm also familiar with it because I've responded to a number of petroleum fires that have occurred along that trail once it stopped being heavily used. So all that said, it strikes me that we are far better off to undertake a task, particularly if it's not funded with town money, to remove all the contaminants that I know for sure are there, having been there, than to sit there and hope that they don't eventually percolate into the groundwater. If they're there, they are certainly on their way to the groundwater even now. So to remove them seems to be a wiser course. As to the issue of restricting access from the side, because there's a considerable rise to the trail once you're heading south, and particularly from Knollwood Drive, it would seem to me that if there's a risk of exposing contaminants once you've done the job because someone abrades the surface, that risk exists today now, even more so if they climb on the trail. So, again, I don't see that. What I don't hear from you, and I plead guilty, I've been totally unaware that you've gotten this far, so I've not gone to your website. What you've not discussed were some of the issues that did arise in earlier discussions, and that is, I see in the summary report that you were talking about trying to control the portion of the trail that is elevated, which bears a risk of people falling. And I think that's probably got to be further discussed. And of course the question of will you be carrying enough liability because someone will fall because they'll be playing and whatever. The other part of it is as you go north, and you do say you're going to attempt to restrict access beyond Haven Street or beyond even Dedham Street. Nevertheless, as it becomes the rail bed is now below grade, you're not apparently going to deal with the railroad bridge, which is a good decision, but how are you going to prevent people from continuing down that way? And how are you going to prevent people from now getting to underneath the Center Street where you have discovered that perhaps some of our more rambunctious teenagers have found it to be a place? I mean, that's all part of it, because if you take a lease on the entire right-of-way, you own those aspects, even if you attempt to preclude use or access.
Right. Our overall feeling about the current corridor is that it's not being watched at all. Our feeling is that by developing the corridor, we're going to have eyes and cell phones and people that will prevent those type of things from happening. They are happening right now. All you need to do is walk that corridor. You'll find empty beer bottles, you'll find graffiti. There's plenty of evidence that people are accessing this rail now. So our feeling is that it's only incrementally better if we capture that corridor and make it available to the town. We think it'll be a better situation.
Well, how are you dealing with the issue of restricting the northern end of it?
Well, ultimately, you're touching on an implementation issue, which would be the purview of the town if it entered into the lease with the MBTA. But the MBTA lease gives the town very broad discretion to establish usage and safety rules. The most obvious of which would be to say you can't, it's open dawn to dusk, for instance. And we think that, simply making rules more restrictive, if not severely more restrictive to the portion of the trail that is north of town center, it deals with the feedback that we've gotten from the town regarding how this might work best for Dover. So it's a matter of adopting the right usage rules and then making sure that they're enforced.
So at this time, you don't have explicit plans to, for example, restrict, put up barriers to prevent access to the below-grade portion of the trail?
Yeah, perfectly reasonable suggestion, but again, I think that it ultimately becomes an implementation question that would be controlled by the Board of Selectmen and by the town when the final plans for the trail were being developed. So again, it's a little bit beyond our purview.
Sir.
Lee Shikawa on Haven Terrace. I'm on a butter on the north side of the town. A couple of questions I have. The funds that you're going to raise, is that going to be in an escrow account before we purchase this land?
No, actually, we're asking the town to capture the lease, and then we'll raise the funds.
Okay. I just want to give this document to the warrant committee and the members. There are 2 sheets on it. The first part actually, on the colorful chart, actually indicates the 4 fades, and then there's about 1.7 miles in the Needham. They talked about spending $400,000. Right now, I think they're in the second phase, and according to the budget and the conservation group that they've actually asked money for, they're running about $50,000 over budget. That's the current phase of it. The details of funding also indicate that they've also asked the conservation in town to procure $100,000. So it's actually costing the town. I was not able to bring you like a 200-page packet, but inside of the, if you look at the Needham costs in 2014, 15, and 16, it's clearly indicated the town is allocating resources to actually work on building a parking lot, which is going to cost them about $165,000. By the way, which is right across the river on the Charles River Street, right? And then people go walk to our neighborhood. So that's my first question, and there's no answer for it. That's fine. The second part is...
I think we'd like to address it. We definitely would like to address it. In fact, Mark Healy might be able to do that more seamlessly because he's been involved with the Needham project. Mark, could you come up and yeah.
Go ahead.
I think it's a lot we can learn from Needham and Newton. I'm Mark Healy, Meeting House Hill Road. And Needham has agreed to provide that money because that town has supported the rail trail pretty strongly. So it's not that they figured, like after the fact, oh no, now we have to give this money. We didn't know about it. They wanted to. And then, I think there's a lot of questions, valid questions about fertilizer, pesticides, whatever. But if you look at your lawns, I bet you also have similar chemicals in your yards. So I think you have to decide, like, am I using these chemicals? How bad are they? How likely is it that those chemicals are still active from years ago? And is it really a risk to let it sit, or are we better off just removing, as was stated? So, there are plenty of arguments all over the map. And I think what we don't know about any issue is a concern. I took my kids biking on Sunday, ages 8, 6, and 4. I want them to have that experience, and I think it's valuable. And we went down Springdale because that's about the only straight, kind of fairly wide road in town. And even so, there are some places where it's a bit nerve-wracking. Now, I don't want to move towns. I think there is so much beauty here. I think that's a great experience that any child should have. And I think we don't have that opportunity strongly yet, as it stands. So I think, we've got to consider really fully looking at this and obviously listen to each other. But there are some good local models. And just back to Needham, that town supports it fully. I can get more details on that as needed.
So this gentleman sort of made a comment about sort of the pesticides, and it's lurking in there. There's I want to be able to sort of answer that I'll make a comment about that. There's a famous trail, a Superfund site called Trail de Corday or something. It's in North Ohio. Fantastic trail that they've actually turned to contaminated land, and they've actually built up a wonderful trail, I think like 70 miles. And first of all, I'm a fan of a trail. I lived in Davis Square for many years, and I loved it. Lexington was definitely a consideration. I looked at Newton because it's a commutable. And to that point, I came to Dover for a reason, because I don't want that. And most of us don't want that. And then I'm pretty sure that those options are available for everyone if they want to move there. That said, there's a comment about that particular study. And after that trail was built and it's considered successful, there was an article by that particular town, written by the paper. They said this study did not even look for toxins that seeped toward the edge of the 150-foot wide right-of-way. Instead, the study focused solely on the middle, 30 feet, and looked no deeper than 3.5 feet. This is exactly what we're talking about in terms of our negligence. New data reviewed by Cascadia Times shows that if the EPA had looked wider and deeper, it would have found pollution under the railbed at levels greater than, in places more widespread than the 1999 study acknowledged. Soil samples taken by Hardy found lead levels as high as 10,300 parts per million toward the edges of the right-of-the-way, places that Union Pacific EPA study did not analyze. The thing I have a concern, which by the way is not my question, is we have this mentality, it's already there. Why bother with it? Let's just go and build a trail. I love this town, and the reason why I do is I see a committee of people sitting here, spending all night, and we do the diligence to go over every single piece, and we take our time to care for this town. Yet we have a group of people who come in here and say, it's there, don't worry about it, put a cap on it, go away. Second of all, the cap is really not even legitimate, because the cap has to be concrete or asphalt, and they're doing a stone dust, which is not even complete, and it's not recommended, as far as I can tell. The problem I have is, the fact that it's there does not mean that we should just turn a blind eye. And I totally would be supportive of this rail trail if we were to take a diligent steps. And it's not our characteristic of our town not to do the due diligence. So that aside, my second question to you, to the Warrant Committee is, I know that there's a 1997 study in Weston, and they talked about the cost. Have that data been presented to all of you? Have you guys presented that information to the Warrant Committee?
So the Beals and Thomas study projects costs.
No, I'm not asking you that. There's a 1997 study done by Weston to analyze the costs, how much it would cost, and also the maintenance costs that takes on the town. It's widely available. Has that been presented to the committee?
Yes.
Okay.
It was shared with us by a resident and then shared via email with our
Okay.
committee about a week ago. So I don't know that anyone's read it, but it's available, yes.
So those are the 6 pages that talk about maintenance. In 1997, there was a study done by Weston and did a fantastic job. I think like you guys, they did a great job. And in that study, what? They made Weston. Weston. In 1997, broke down the cost. It's 6 pages, 3 pages back-sided, double-sided. Talked about the cost of town in the first year is going to be $100,000 to $160,000 in the first year. Now, I understand that there's this volunteer, but again, it is not characteristic of our town that I know of Dover to just turn the blind eye and say somebody's going to pay for it. I'm really disappointed that we're not being transparent about this. And again, I'm a strong supporter of a trail. I love it. I actually walked in Newton trails in the backyard because that's behind my office at TripAdvisor. So my guys we used to go for a walk there on the creosote. But I urge everyone, please read the facts. 1997, $100,000 to $160,000 first year. We're talking about 20 years ago. That cost is a lot more. They talked about the police, the firemen, the porta potties, the markers that they have to place. It's all in there. Please take a moment and read it. And please do not take shortcut and turn the blind eye. We need to do the due diligence. You guys have done a fantastic job so far. Please don't turn a blind eye on this important issue for us. Thank you.
Just a couple of We can have a response, and then Justine, I saw your hand, and we'll
Alan, do you
keep
want to?
proceeding.
I think.
Can I ask two responses? Sure. Yeah. So on the Weston study, why would the Weston study be more reliable than the Beals and Thomas study for Dover?
Because the Weston study actually breaks down and talks about actual labor costs. Now, you have two kinds of ways of running numbers. My background's accounting, I do technical work. One study, which is, I guess you guys didn't, or the study didn't have funds, talked about the goodness of people and doing study and assuming they volunteer. This is a solid study with actual numbers.
But the Beals and Thomas has 3 different cases of scenarios that go through the different costs, including maintenance and maintenance.
For the construction.
Not just and maintenance.
But do they talk about the police?
Yeah, they do talk about the town costs too.
They did not talk about the actual cost.
It's in the report. Do you know how many miles the Weston Trail was?
I don't remember exactly. The total length is about 7 miles.
So you also have to think about, miles of the trail when you're talking about numbers too. So we just want everybody to be careful about throwing numbers around.
Mr. Chairman, just to point out, like Beals and Thomas is here and can speak to their methodology with respect to how they develop the cost estimates for.
Can I also point out you guys have interrupted me a lot. Robert, I know you're doing a fantastic job, but I know you're actively trying to build, supporting rail trail in Sherburne and Ashland as well, right? I know you have a big vision of it. Isn't that true?
Robert Widenick, I work as a consultant, and I also am a volunteer on the Holliston Trails Committee, and I'm currently working, if what you're referring to is the Holliston Rail Trail, I'm the chairman of that trail committee, actively working on that.
On the Facebook page, you said we're getting close to Sherburne. Did you write that or not? That was your comment.
That could be, yes. We're in the process of acquiring the land that goes to Sherburne.
Okay, so you're actively participating in that.
If I could interrupt, I definitely want to make sure that everybody has a chance to voice their opinions, and part of that is keeping your comments or questions as brief as possible.
Okay.
So.
But he made a point. He said he was on a Facebook supporting it.
I appreciate it. Justine?
Yeah, I guess I have 3 points. First of all, it may be in the blue book, I haven't actually read it, but my understanding is this is a very limited request that you're making at this year's town meeting. As I understand it, the only request you're making is that the selectmen enter into the lease agreement with the MBTA, correct?
That's correct.
I think it actually just asks, or would grant the selectmen the authority to enter into a lease with the MBTA. It wouldn't be binding.
And so, therefore, my assumption is in subsequent years, there would probably be a discussion, and also from your point of view, a tallying up from the town the results of your fundraising, which, as I understand it, is going to approximate, which I have read, the Beals and Thomas report. And if you aren't there, it ain't going to happen. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Thanks. All right. Now, I think what's really behind this, besides the cost, and yes, I am a supporter of the rail trail, is fear. And I think what I would like to hear from the LSPs specifically, and I think you need to go into a lot more detail with the public about why the capping would be better for the abutters and for the rest of us than just leaving the trail as is. Not whether you do this tonight or at town meeting, I don't care, but I do think you need to go into that because I think people are afraid. And when they're afraid, they act irrationally, frankly. And now thirdly, my last comment is yes, I am executive director of the Upper Charles Conservation. I do know Robert Wideman. This is no secret. We have worked since 1996 on creating a 26-mile rail-to-trail conversion from Sherburne through Holliston to Milford, up Hopkinton, over to Ashland, and Framingham. And I am always so surprised how fearful our town is of change. And at least for the 3 towns that already have the rail trail, there is no environmental problem. And secondly, it is a tremendous community asset for those towns. On April 8th, I am leading a walk, 10 o'clock at the townhouse here. If you want to see what the Holliston Trails looks like, please join me. And all I can say from a real estate point of view, your properties are going to go up if you have a rail trail on it. It is not something you do.
Here.
Alan? Thank you. So, Alan Moss, Haven Street. I've been doing my due diligence too for the last 3 years, and so I'm in favor of this. I think the things I've noted are leaving those 1,000 creosote soaked ties there is a bigger issue for you and your wells and your soil than taking them out. And the trail takes them out. They're gone. Leaving them there, they leach into the soil. And so if you do nothing, and so many of my friends and neighbors are butters, if you do nothing, they stay there and they rot for the next 50 years. So that's something worth considering. And to clarify for my neighbor here, the stone dust cap is the recommended Mass DEP cap. It's not concrete. So this stone dust is the recommended cap by Mass DEP. And secondly, if you look at the average maintenance cost per mile for 30 other trails in the United States, the average cost per annum is $10,000 to maintain a stone dust trail. So $400,000 in Weston, maybe Weston prices.
Okay, thank you. Did I see a hand up back there, Bill? No? Okay, I've seen one here for...
Doug, I think this gentleman has been waiting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Like I said, I'm going to call on everybody, so but go ahead. No, go ahead. It's fine.
Hi, I'm Rick Guerin, 15 Center Street, Precious Beginnings Preschool. I'm here to address how Article 18 proposes to potentially lease the entire rail bed in Dover without pointing out the future intentions of the Greenway. Both the article and the feasibility study represents this as a short Dover-only trail, but Needham has already developed a 1.5 miles with plans to connect to Dover. Medfield is waiting for Dover to convert, and their plan is to add their trail. Newton Upper Falls Greenway website states, a future trail connection to Needham, Dover, and Medfield via the proposed Bay Colony Rail Trail map may later provide the residents of Newton a chance to enjoy an off-road experience rivaling the popular Minuteman Bikeway in Lexington. The Bay Colony Rail Trail website calls this a Newton, Needham, Dover, Medfield project. The Friends of the Greenway have not provided information regarding future plans. Some members have mentioned only part of the rail bed being developed, while others look forward to a 7+ mile trail being developed. We don't know what that is yet. Research from other 7-mile trails show volume estimates of 1,100 to 2,000 visitors on a beautiful Saturday in the fall. These estimates come from Holliston, Milford, and the Bruce Freeman Trail. It seems like Article 18 puts Dover at risk for financial implications by requesting this lease before the research has been done on cost of future development. Given the potential impact of this effort, why is it not part of the Long-Term Planning Commission? It appears that this project has not been vetted adequately given the broadly requested language in Article 18. Article 18 appears to lay the foundation of this multi-town 7+ mile trail without addressing the impact or cost. I can honestly say that I am for the rail trail if all the information is presented. But all the information hasn't been presented, and there's a number of my parents that want this trail, and I want this trail for them. But what I don't want is a trail that's rushed into without everything being vetted properly. And if this is going to be that trail, I mean, they talked about it, comparing it to the Minuteman commuter bikeway. Now, the Dover link of this particular railroad trail is different than a Holliston or a Milford. What it does is it's more like a Bedford, Lexington, Arlington, Cambridge trail, which now links you from Medfield to Newton. So it's almost a more or less Minuteman
bike trail when you think about it. Now, I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm saying that you should have all the information up front, because I was a little disappointed that Article 18 asked for the whole lease. Now, I'm sure you have a lot of reasons why you asked for the whole lease, but my concern is that, simple concerns, is that all the information has not been presented, and what's been mentioned before is that Dover does a great job of gathering information and presenting it, and I think that's only fair. I'm not saying I'm against it, don't do it. I'm just saying get all the information. We haven't seen anything in regards to abutters surveys. That Minuteman Bike Trail's been around for 22 years. There should be abutters surveys. What are their big issues? Let's deal with them. It's loitering, it's trespass, it's littering, and it's dog poop. Okay, it's not a big deal. It's negligible. What's not negligible, though, is what the abutters say they want. They say they want more police present, better fencing, and they want better signage and parking availability. So all that needs to be taken into consideration. I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying that it's not, Article 18 asks for a lot more than what's been presented, and that's what I'm concerned about, is how are you going to address my issues in regards to fencing and everything else that goes with it. That's cost as well.
I get it, Rick. You have to capture the entire expanse of the rail. So we're not able to just take portions of it. We have to take the entire.
The Massachusetts Realty Group, which is responsible for MBTA negotiations, it looks like the parcels are broken up in different spaces. So that's what I'm saying, is that, has this really been presented? I mean, I contacted the Mass Realty Group.
As we understand it here, Rick, we need to capture the entire expanse. Whether or not we develop the entire expanse is a town decision. It's, as Rob mentioned earlier, an implementation question. And we want the town to vet this. We want there to be consensus around this.
Right. Well, then we should also make sure that, can we get a soil sample before we enter into a lease? I don't think that's going to be possible.
Right. Again, we've had some of the LSPs talk to this, so I'm not going to rehash that.
All right. So actually, a yes or no answer would be to that. Can we get a soil sample before lease?
Robert Weidnick again from Beals and Thomas. There is part of that draft lease agreement. It's actually on the second page, just before item 4. It says no testing shall be made of the soil by the municipality on the premises, and no soil shall be removed from the premises until the lease has been fully executed and entered into.
Information is what we need. That's all. Full disclosure. Thank you.
Right.
By my count, we've been discussing this for about 50 minutes, so if you have additional comments, I would ask that you please keep them short. I'd like to call on people who have not spoken yet.
Good evening, Grant, Stephen, 19 Village Hill Road. I want to thank everybody's contribution, both on the pro and the anti and the somewhere in the middle position this evening. All I would ask is that these are a lot of important questions, and I'm sure we'll rehash some of these questions at town meeting. I would ask anybody coming, please read the reports in detail. All that information is on the website. Read the Beals and Thomas stuff. Let's not have questions that completely ignore the enormous amount of work that's been done by townspeople here in Dover over the last few years around this issue. Let's have an informed debate which is based on the facts and on the published reports. Let's not cherry-pick bits of random data from across the country and just throw out and scaremonger. Let's make these based on the facts. All the information's out there. If you have follow-up questions, talk to people in the Friends. I'm a member of the Friends, full disclosure. Talk to people in the Friends, but let's keep this a fact-based conversation, please. Thank you.
Val?
Val Lynn, 14 Haven Terrace. There has been a lot of information out there about this, and one of the things that I think about when you talk about risk, that the current environmental risk exists right now. But the other thing that we haven't talked about is the risk that people face on our streets every day when they're out there running and walking, and their kids are trying to ride their bikes. I was at Haven and Church Street just not that long ago, and a woman almost got hit by a landscaping truck as she was running across Church Street on Haven. That's the kind of stuff that we need to avoid, because it would be really sad if we passed up on this opportunity only to have a massive accident happen on our streets. And I know some of the big performance bikers who are out here, Just a few years ago, there was a man who was med-flighted to one of, I think, Mass General downtown, who had severe head injuries because he was hit by a car on the road. And I would hate to see that for performance bikers, but also especially for our children, because I know lots of kids in elementary school who are out there on the streets every day, walking and biking. I used to live on Center Street, 11 Center Street. It scared me to death after I first moved here to Dover and saw a 5th grader who was on his bike at rush hour trying to get across the Center Street Bridge as buses and cars and landscaping trucks are flying past him. And I froze. I froze in my yard thinking, oh my God, please help this kid get to the school or wherever he's trying to get to. I think that the risks are real today, not 10 years from now. They're real today, and this is what needs to be addressed in our town today. So I really hope, in addition to all the financial issues that people may have and concerns, which are valid, that we really think about what are the risks to our community and the children and the families in our community who put themselves at risk every day as they're running and walking on our streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol?
Carol Lisbon, 2 Cross Street. I just want to clear up a couple of things. One is the Beals and Thomas report was the second report. The first report was done by the Rail Trail Committee, and that was about 2 years of effort by a whole bunch of folks. It's about 2 inches thick. I believe it's still on the website. And it addresses all the some of the implementation issues, the police issues, the EMT issues, the fire issues, and all those costs that you talked about. They have been studied, and they're in the original report. The Beals and Thomas report was done with funding from the Friends of the Dover Greenway because the town did not approve funds to complete the report. The Rail Trail Committee identified 4 or 5 areas that needed professional support. And the only way to get those 4 or 5 areas done was to hire a professional consultant, which the Friends of the Greenway developed money for. So you can't just look at the Beals and Thomas report and say, where are the answers to all the other questions? A lot of the other questions are answered in the original Rail Trail Committee report that was done by your fellow citizens several years ago. So I urge you to look at both reports together, because that's how they were designed to be. They should be on the website. They used to be, so I'm assuming it is. They still are? Yes, they still are. The other thing is that neither Needham nor Dover would be leasing the bridge, the famous bridge. So you can't connect to Dover unless you want to swim over or walk when it gets shallow in August. It's not an issue. If a lease was to be signed, it would have to go to town meeting again, both in Needham and in Dover, and the cost would be somewhere around $2 to $2.5 million. So I think it's a little bit of fear-mongering to worry about the bridge when it would have to go to both town meetings all over again, and Dover can decide to say, thanks, Needham, you may want to connect, but we don't. Which right now, Needham is very clear that they know that Dover does not want anybody from Needham coming into town. Shame on us. But anyway, so that it's not an issue, and that I would categorize as fear-mongering. Thank you.
Gentleman over here, in the blue shirt.
Good evening. I'm Andres Rapella on Haven Terrace. So I just want to address a couple of points. The first, the one about fear. I think that's an important point and certainly plays a role for all of us. There's nothing more fearful to me than a runaway budget. So that's, I think, an important consideration here. The point about change, I think change is sometimes good. It's not always good. It has to be evaluated, and both sides of the risk equation has to be studied. To make the decision, you need all the facts to do that, right? So we'll look at both studies in combination. We'll certainly look at all the facts and try to drive the decision that way. But my question is more about the next step. So the article proposes that the selectmen would be awarded the power to enter the lease. So my question is, once that's granted, if it is granted, can the selectmen go ahead and proceed with a lease without bringing any discussion back to the town? That's my first question.
I'm sorry, can they proceed with the lease without coming back to town?
Yes, so once we have the lease in place and we start the process of the fundraising and fully understand the costs, once it's understood, can the selectmen move forward independently with any further steps?
No, my understand.
I'm a little somewhat confused by the question, quite honestly, because they're asking the townspeople to vote to give us the authority to enter into the lease, a 99-year lease.
Okay.
So, and then as a sort of call it backstop, if they don't raise the money over the course of the next couple of years, it doesn't happen anyway.
Okay. So once the lease is entered, it's for the entire stretch,
99
right?
years.
And at that point,
Unless it reverts back because of non-performance.
so once it's entered, it's for the entire piece for 99 years. And at that point in time, as soon as we enter it, that's when the liability shifts to the town, correct? For the first, unless the insurance is taken out.
Correct, correct.
Okay.
And I think it's everyone's intention to do.
So is it
We actually have to
true,
clarify that.
to state that we could incur, at the point of signature of the lease, we could incur liability for the town in terms of cost and any other concerns without fully understanding the rest of the equation? And, for example, can we actually get the funds raised and those other questions? At that point, we own the liability.
These guys did a wonderful presentation for us in our last select meeting, 2 meetings ago. And one of the questions was the insurance. Oh, yes, thank you, I'm sorry. One of the questions that these folks was, okay, the insurance. We don't want, the town doesn't want to pay for it, and they somewhat volunteered to pay for the insurance that covers the first 5 years. Now, again, so that's the first financial consideration they have.
But it's 99 years, right?
Yes, but the insurance is a 5-year plan, correct me if I'm wrong. 5-year plan for how much? I believe it was some $50,000 of which the state reimburses.
Half of it.
about half of that, but it would be donated funds.
How much does the insurance cost?
50. Say that again?
How much is the insurance for?
That's a good question.
I believe it's $3 million.
Yeah,
Right.
that's correct.
So that's my.
And then after that 5-year period, I understand that it reverts back to the MBTA. It covers us through the construction period. We can get a lease, or excuse me.
So the
a
town is
policy.
indemnified in the lease after 5
We're
years?
indemnified through the policy for the first 5 years. After the 5 years pass, it goes back to the MBTA for liability.
The environmental questions with respect to the lease are somewhat complicated, and I'm happy to talk.
Right. And then the last,
I was just saying that the environmental issues as they relate to the lease are somewhat complicated, and the friends are happy to take time with anybody who wants to understand them on a one-off basis, rather than, I could give you a 10-minute answer, but
well, I guess, my point here, and my question here is, it seems like we are looking to incur that potential liability, and we're talking about different risks, and I understand there's risks today without the Greenway, but my concern is, are we trading risks here? So will there be no accidents on the Greenway? Will there be no one getting hurt on the Greenway? We could have those potential risks just as well on the Greenway. So I just want to make sure that we're balancing that equation and we have all of that liability understood before we commit the power to actually go into the lease. That's all.
About the woman in blue in back, you've had your hand up for a while.
Kristen Brophy, 35 Center Street, and with respect to the chairman's request, I'll be brief. I wanted to respond to Justine's comments about fear. I have a different perception of what I've heard tonight. To me, the presentation was, I'm sorry, I used to be much louder. With respect to the presentation tonight, I didn't hear a lot of facts. What I heard were pulls, like emotional pulls. Oh, there'll never be an accident. Our kids will be safe. We'll see people pushing strollers. I live on Center Street, across from sidewalks. I see kids riding bikes on the sidewalks all the time. My kids used to walk back and forth to Chickering School every day on the sidewalks. They were fine. I see strollers being pushed all the time. So for me, it's not fear. it's actually concerned that the facts aren't being presented. So I think the questions, excuse me, tonight are valid, and they just are a request from your community to look at the facts and consider a substantive and quantifiable discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
The reason we chose to present what the vision is because there in fact are two studies, and because we focused on the financial aspect, which is the governance of the Warrant Committee. So our intention was not to come up here tonight and try to reiterate or rehash a lot of work that's been done in two separate studies. That's there. That information is available. We've been trying to push it around as much as possible, but that wasn't our intention tonight. So,
sir.
Hi, Ron Hadar, 60 Main Street. Just want to distill down a couple things and sort of look at them practically. There seems to be this thought that you sign the lease and then the world sort of ends and the town is stuck with this thing. That seems, from what I'm hearing tonight, it's clearly not the case, that or even going back one step, is if you approve the selectmen to sign this lease, then everything's off the table. So first of all, you have safety net number one, the selectmen. The selectmen, I assume, are going to meet on this. That'll probably be open hearing, public meetings. People will be able to add that. They're going to put some parameters on this to make sure that A, there's enough money, B, that the maintenance is thought of, and the various costs of the towns are taken into consideration before signing the lease. It also seems like once we sign the lease, that if nothing happens or there's an environmental disaster out there that's discovered, you can walk away. You can say, sorry, it doesn't work out. That seems to be the case. And, obviously we'll let, some lawyers who are smarter than me figure that out. But that's what I'm hearing from the board, and obviously I think that'll be more clearly said at town meeting. In terms of, fear and facts and that sort of thing, the town doesn't have sidewalks. It has sidewalks in a very limited part of town.
2%. 2%
Thank you.
of town roads have sidewalks.
It's 2%, and it's nice that there was walking over there, but the rest of the town should have the opportunity to have a similar experience through the center of town, connecting all of our major parts of the town and the schools and the center of town and so forth. So I would urge you very strongly to think about that. And then going back to the environmental issues, you have the Massachusetts DP who has a clear outline of how this is supposed to work and how it's worked in other communities. I think that it's perfectly reasonable to rely on that. The Friends are gonna, as part of this, make sure that all the reports are up to date and that the due diligence is done to make sure that we're not increasing the risk here, and clearly it seems like we're decreasing the risk. I think you should think about that as well. That's really all I'll say. Thank you.
Okay, so we're about an hour and 10 minutes into this, so please raise your hand only if you have something very substantive to say that will advance the discussion. And if I see any hands raised, I'm going to take you at your word that you do.
So good evening, Ted Kramer, 31 Center Street, and as others have said, thanks to everyone, and there's been a lot of good work done on this topic, and I think this is an important question for Dover, and the challenge for me is understanding kind of the difference in visions here, because we can call it fear-mongering or whatever you want, but the reality is there's a vision here of a quaint little trail through town, which I think many of us support. Like, I have 3 kids who are riding bikes around town and walking to school, and having a little path is not a bad deal. But the thought of a Minuteman Trail, and you can say it's fear-mongering, but the reality is this article enables a full trail to be built and is the starting point for something bigger. And if we're talking about a trail that's 50 people a day coming through on a busy weekend, just going for walks and their neighbors and friends, that's one scenario. If you say it's 4,000 or 5,000 people a day, which is more of a Minuteman Trail, that's a completely different scenario. And for me, I'm confused because I look at this and say both are enabled with what we're starting here. And the first vision of having a few more trails around town to add to the hundreds of miles we have isn't terrible, but the thought of Minuteman Trail coming through Dover with 4,000 or 5,000 people is not what we're looking for. And I haven't seen from this proposal the mechanisms that should make all of us here comfortable that we're not opening up another big trail. I mean, Nonet Woods, I think 80% of the people who visit the woods there are not from Dover. The cyclists all around town are not from Dover. Do we want 3,000 people coming through Dover from out of town? No. So I think the questions and concerns, we all share the vision for a connected community, more trails for our kids and safe roads. But this doesn't address that, and it leaves a lot of open-ended questions, both in terms of financial risk, budgets, expenditures, and the ultimate plan. And I struggle with the fact that I can watch that video and get excited, but then I can go, if that turns into Minuteman, I'm not excited anymore. Thank you.
And I think we have that safeguard, Ted. You and I have discussed this at your home. And I think you and I share a very similar vision, quite honestly. And I think Carol Lisbon already said this, that it will not be possible to connect to Needham without the town giving its approval. What we do on May 2nd will not allow the Minuteman to happen. So in some way, I think that is concerning people when they should clearly know that they would have the opportunity to voice their opinion. And if people decide that it makes this community much more livable, that we could connect to Needham so that we could go to the train station or beyond that into our jobs in Boston safely, then that would be the decision of the town. I'm not saying it won't happen. But I am saying to you that there's an opportunity for this town to weigh in on it. And so to call it a Minuteman, I think, is incorrect. I want to clarify that point. We never voted against converting this rail into a trail. We never voted that.
We voted against even spending $5,000 at the time.
We voted.
Let's have some order here.
We
That
voted
was a
in
separate
favor
vote
of
about
the
a feasibility
$5,000.
study.
We voted against $50,000. The Friends of the Dover Greenway, because I want to make this point, heard this town loud and clear when we voted. And it was that we do not want to allocate funds from our budget to realize this trail. We've heard that. We're not coming here tonight asking you to do that. We're coming here tonight to ask that we might capture this lease so we can raise the funds. That's fundamental. And if we can't, then it goes back to what it is right now. No harm, no foul. We tried and it didn't work. But I think we'll do it. And I believe this will be a Dover event.
I just want to make one point about that, because there's a lot of discussion about the Friends and the Friends. 15 years from now, how many Friends will be here? 20 years from now, how many Friends will be here?
More than you can count. More than you can count.
We got very little notice. A lot of this, I know you say it's out there if you're one of the Friends. I found out about this a couple of weeks ago. I'm sorry, I found out about this a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, there's been a lot of work done underneath the radar.
I'd like to push back against that.
You've been pushing back a lot.
The Friends of the Dover Greenway have held more than 10 open forums
I don't really see this discussion
at the library and in
towards
people's
any
homes.
resolution tonight. If anyone has a very material question, I don't think there's any need for clarification. I mean, if there's
The Western Trail is 3.1 miles. It's very similar to our distance, so the cost comes out to about $50,000 a month of the first year. Thank you.
all right. One more. This woman over here.
Mark Gold, Artificial Road. I just want to say that I think it speaks volumes when I heard that the trustees of reservations did a study and saw that in the trails that we have now, 78% people on the trails are not from Dover, only 22%. Hales Reservation came out with the same stats. So why are we pushing something so hard when the people of the town don't use the trails? I guess that kind of speaks, to have a statistic like that, those percentages, those are pretty remarkable.
So if I may, comparing the assets, I think Noanna Woodlands is 17 and a half miles of connected trails, I think 600 acres of land all in. And it's a resource that's promoted heavily by the trustees of the reservation on a statewide, even New England basis. The Greenway is going to be 3.5 miles, 5.5 acres of land. And it connects points that matter to Dover to other points that matter to Dover. So I think, and the conclusion that Beals and Thomas reached, based upon the size of the trail and the lack of amenities that should be interesting outside of Dover, their expectation is that this is going to be nothing but a local resource and not something that would create a significant regional draw because its scope and character is fundamentally different than, say, Noanette or Powysset or Hale.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I've let this go on for 1 hour and 20 minutes. I really appreciate the Friends' presentation and everyone's comments. I'm very concerned that we will not get a quorum for town meeting this year. So everyone here, if you could please show up, I greatly appreciate that. The meeting's adjourned. Thank you.